Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving across open farmland a little after 9 at night, taking County Road 14 back toward my place outside Sioux Center. It was one of those stretches where the land goes flat in every direction, and the only landmarks are grain silos and the occasional row of trees planted as windbreaks. The sky was completely clear, cold, crisp, and full of stars. The kind of night where you can see your own headlights reflecting off the frost on the fields. I wasn't tired, but the drive was mindless. Straight road, no cars, no towns for miles. I had the radio low and one hand resting on the wheel. My phone sat face down in the cup holder. Nothing unusual. Then the sky ahead turned gray. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't fog. It wasn't even gradual. 1 second, everything was black and starry, and the next, the entire dome of sky directly in front of me shifted to a flat, dull gray. Not bright, just washed out, like someone had slapped a solid sheet of color in front of me. The stars vanished behind it. I slowed instinctively, staring through the windshield. The gray wasn't moving. It wasn't clouds. There were no clouds that night. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I'd zoned out and headlights from a distant truck had caught something weird. But I was alone on the road. My mirrors showed nothing behind me, nothing ahead but that blank curtain of sky. It lasted maybe a second, maybe less. Then the stars snapped back into place. Not faded back, snapped. The sky went from gray to perfectly clear as if someone flipped a switch. All the constellations exactly where they should have been. The road looked normal again. The fields on either side went back to reflecting the starlight. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to understand what I saw. My foot hovered over the brake, but the car kept creeping forward at 10, maybe 15 miles per hour. The radio hummed quietly. After a few moments, I pulled off onto the shoulder, trying to calm myself. I put the car in park and leaned forward to stare at the sky. Nothing was strange anymore. No haze, no shifting colors, no missing stars. I checked the time. The car clock read 9:42. I frowned because I could have sworn it had been 9:36 when I last glanced at it maybe 30 seconds earlier. I grabbed my phone and tapped the screen. It said 9:36. I held the two displays side by side. Car, 9:42. Phone, 9:36. I thought the car clock must have reset, except car clocks don't jump forward 6 minutes on their own. And the weirdest part was that the radio station hadn't glitched. No static, no interruption. Everything in the cabin was normal except the time. I sat there for a while, letting the car idle. The air through the vents felt slightly warmer than it should have. Not hot, just a few degrees off, like the heater had nudged up by itself. I checked the dial. It was where I'd left it. I shut off the engine and the warmth faded instantly. That made me nervous. I opened the door to cool off, but the night air felt strange too. Thin, almost hollow. The sound of it was wrong. Far away, like I was hearing the countryside from inside a garage rather than sitting directly in it. I stepped out and listened hard. Usually the farmland buzzes at night. Crickets, distant machinery, the faint hum of wind through cornfields even after harvest. This was silent, completely silent. No wind against my jacket, no rustle in the dry grass. I walked a few steps down the gravel shoulder, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. The stars looked normal, but I found myself counting them in the line of Orion's belt, checking the positions like maybe something would show itself by being slightly off. Everything looked exactly how it should. I pulled out my phone again. The time still read 9:36. I refreshed it twice. Still 9:36. I got back into the car and turned the engine on. The clock still said 9:42. I reached for the tiny pinhole button to reset it manually. The moment my thumb hovered over it, the numbers flickered, not the whole display, just the minutes. 9:42 blinked once, then changed to 9:38. I jerked my hand away. The radio crackled softly during the flicker, only for a second. Then it steadied again. I sat motionless, breathing shallowly. My headlights stretched across the road, picking up the reflective posts. Nothing in the beams looked strange, but it didn't feel like the same road I'd been driving on. A low rumble rolled across the sky, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Not thunder, more like pressure shifting overhead, the kind of vibration you feel in your chest more than you actually hear. I looked up. The stars directly above me seemed slightly blurred, not moving, not dimming, just subtly out of focus, like I was viewing them through a thin layer of warped glass. When I blinked, they sharpened again. I told myself I'd had enough. I put the car into gear and pulled back onto the road. The engine sounded normal again. The radio was clear. As I drove, the farmland gradually started sounding familiar. Wind returning, a distant animal call, the ordinary hum of nighttime prairie air. I checked the car clock repeatedly. 9:43, 9:44, 9:45. Now moving normally. My phone, though, still lagged behind. It didn't update until I reached the county line and passed beneath the single blinking red tower light near the grain elevator. As the light flickered in my windshield, my phone time jumped from 9:39 to 9:47 in one clean leap, like it had been holding its breath. I pulled into my driveway at 10:12 p.m. according to both clocks. I was exhausted in a way that didn't match the length of the drive. My hands felt shaky, my chest felt tight. I kept replaying the moment the sky turned gray. How sudden it was, how wrong it looked, how it didn't resemble fog or light pollution or anything natural. Before going inside, I glanced up at the sky one more time. Clear. Ordinary. Perfectly normal. Except as I turned toward my door, something caught in the corner of my eye. Just a subtle shift in the darkness above the fields. A single patch of sky that looked a shade lighter than the rest, like a faint sheet of gray pulling taut behind the stars. When I looked directly at it, it disappeared. I went inside and locked the door without thinking. I haven't taken County Road 14 at night since, and anytime one of my clocks disagrees with another, even by a minute, I feel that same cold weight in my chest, the memory of sitting alone on the shoulder of that empty road with the sky pulling its color into itself and giving it back wrong. I noticed the glow when I was halfway down the driveway with the trash bag dragging against my leg. It was around 9:30 at night, early January, cold enough that the air felt stiff in my nose. My neighborhood in Cedar Falls is pretty quiet after dark. Dim porch lights, the occasional dog bark, nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't even looking at anything, just trying to get the chore done so I could go back inside. Then something bright enough to register in my peripheral vision made me stop. A soft white glow sat on the roof of the Jensen house across the street. At first I thought it was just their porch light reflecting off frost, but the angle was wrong. The glow looked like it was resting on the shingles, like a puddle of light, except on top of the house. It was flat and still, maybe 5 feet wide, too bright to be moonlight, but not bright enough to cast shadows. I stood there holding the trash bag, staring. My eyes adjusted, but the glow didn't change. It didn't waver or blink or respond to anything. It just sat there, this clean pool of white light with no source. After a moment, I took a few slow steps toward the curb. The glow didn't react, but something in the air did. The neighborhood soundscape, distant traffic, a generator hum from a couple blocks over, felt like it dulled slightly. Not silent, just muffled, like someone turned down the world. I kept moving forward. The closer I got, the more I realized how wrong the glow looked. It didn't reflect off the edges of the roof. It didn't tint the gutters. It didn't behave like light at all. More like someone had laid a flat white shape onto the rooftop and given it a faint pulse of brightness. I crossed the street without really thinking about why. When I stepped onto the pavement on their side, the glow vanished. Instantly. No fading, no dimming, just gone. The roof went back to being an ordinary outline under the street lamp, with frost sparkling on the shingles. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Nothing. I backed up a step, half expecting it to reappear. Nothing. I stood there for at least a minute, maybe longer, trying to decide what I'd actually seen. I finally turned around to head home, but halfway back across the street, the neighborhood fell into that same muffled quiet again. I stopped walking. No breeze, no distant cars, no dog collar jingling next door. Just that soft, padded silence you get in heavy snow, even though it wasn't snowing. I turned back to the Jensen house. The glow wasn't there, but something about the darkness around their roof felt dense, like it was trying too hard to look normal. The shape of the roofline looked too simple, like someone had redrawn it with fewer details. My chest tightened. I took a careful step backward. A flicker appeared above the house. Not a glow, just a quick, pale shimmer, the way light looks when it reflects off metal far away. Except nothing metal was up there. Just shingles, cold air, and the faint haze from someone's chimney a block over. The shimmer stretched horizontally for a split second and then snapped inward, disappearing like someone had pinched it closed. My hands felt numb, and not from the cold. I wanted to go inside immediately, but curiosity pinned me in place. I stared at the rooftop, waiting. A few seconds passed, then a faint crackling noise drifted down. Soft, irregular, almost like static, but more organic. It reminded me of ice shifting on a lake, only quieter and somehow closer. I stepped onto the curb again. The crackling stopped instantly. The normal nighttime sounds came rushing back. An engine revving in the distance, wind moving a frozen bush in the Jensen yard, a dog's nails tapping on someone's hardwood floor inside a house down the block. I turned and walked quickly back to my driveway, a tightness in my throat I couldn't swallow away. I dropped the trash bag into the bin and stood still for a moment, listening. Everything seemed normal again. When I reached my front door, I checked over my shoulder one more time. The roof across the street looked perfectly dark and ordinary. I went inside, locked the door, and pulled the blinds without thinking. About 20 minutes later, curiosity won out, and I peeked out through a narrow gap. The Jensen house was still dark, no glow on the roof, but my porch light flickered once, sharp, quick, like it blinked. The bulb was new. My phone buzzed on the counter. I walked over and checked it. No notification, no missed call, no alert, just a timestamp I didn't recognize on the lock screen. 9:41 p.m., even though the clock at the top said 9:38. When I tapped the screen, the 9:41 disappeared. I stood there with the phone in my hand, staring at the blank lock screen reflection of my own face. My pulse was loud in my ears. I didn't look outside again for the rest of the night. But the next morning, when I went out to my car, I noticed something odd. A faint dusting of white powder on my windshield. Not frost, not pollen, something finer, almost like chalk dust. Only on my car, not on the driveway, not on the trash bin, nowhere else. I brushed it off with my sleeve, and it smeared into nothing. I checked the roof across the street. Normal. But as I backed out of the driveway, something made me stop at the curb. I looked up at the Jensen house one more time. For just a second, less than that really, a soft white glow formed at the corner of the roofline. A tiny patch, like a test spot, almost hesitant. It flickered once and dissolved before I could fully focus on it. Then the normal morning light took over. That was it. Since then, every time I take the trash out after dark, I catch myself watching the rooftops more than the ground, checking for shapes or pools of brightness that shouldn't exist. So far, nothing has happened again. But sometimes the air gets that same muffled quality for a moment, and I freeze, waiting to see if the light will reappear before I take another step. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to this soft tapping sound on my bedroom window. Not a knock, not like a branch scraping, more like someone lightly flicking their fingernail against the glass at slow, even intervals. I remember the exact time because the red digits on my alarm clock too bright in the darkness, like the power had surged for a second. At first, I didn't move. I just lay there, listening. My neighborhood outside Duluth is usually dead quiet at night. Woods on three sides, only a few houses spaced far apart. If anything ever wakes me up, it's coyotes or the occasional plow truck in winter. But this tapping didn't sound like an animal. It was too controlled. Tap, tap, tap. 3 seconds between each one. After maybe the fifth tap, I sat up slowly. My heart rate jumped, but I kept telling myself it was probably a loose piece of siding or something blown from the porch. Except there was no wind. I would have heard it in the trees. I reached for my phone, but the screen was black and wouldn't turn on. No low battery icon, no vibration, nothing. It was fine when I went to sleep. The tapping stopped the moment I swung my legs over the bed. That silence felt heavier than the sound. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. So I stood and walked to the window, expecting to see a raccoon or a branch hanging loose. But when I pulled the curtain aside, the yard looked completely normal. Dim porch light, empty grass, the dark line of trees just past the fence. Then I touched the glass. It was warm. Not just a little warmer than the air. Warm, like someone had held a heating pad against it. I pressed my palm flat against it and felt the warmth radiate inward. It didn't make sense. The temperature outside was in the low 20s, and it wasn't warm everywhere. Only one patch, roughly the height and width of a person's face, maybe a little taller. I pulled my hand away quickly, my fingertips tingling. I leaned closer, squinting through the pane, trying to see if maybe a floodlight from the neighbor's yard was hitting it at an angle. But the warmth didn't spread. It stayed in that single, defined spot. As I stared, the air in the room seemed to thicken. Not visually, just in that way where you feel pressure change without hearing anything. My ears didn't pop, but they felt stuffed, like before a storm. Then something faint shifted outside. A flash. Not light exactly, more like a brief distortion in the air, as if a section of the yard shimmered for half a second and went still again. I stepped back from the window. My chest tightened. I grabbed the edge of the curtain and held it without pulling it open again. After maybe 10 seconds, the tapping returned. But this time it wasn't against the glass. It sounded like it was tapping the house siding beneath the window. Lighter, quicker, tracing a line back and forth. I froze, listening hard, my pulse thudding in my throat. The taps moved upward, one at a time, slow and deliberate, like someone climbing toward the window. I took another step back. The tapping stopped exactly at the height of the warm patch on the glass. I don't know how long I stood there. The whole house felt wrong, too still, too thick, like the air had weight to it. My phone still wouldn't turn on, no matter how long I held the button. The digital clock on the nightstand flickered once, the numbers blurring for a moment, then steadied again. I finally forced myself to look through the window one more time. Nothing. No movement in the yard. No shadows. No animals. The trees were still. The warm area on the glass had faded a little, but was still warmer than the rest by several degrees. I could feel the difference without touching it. A faint sound drifted through the walls, then a low vibrating hum coming from outside. It wasn't mechanical, more like something resonating at a distance, barely audible. The kind of sound you can only hear because the world around you has gone so silent. The hum lasted maybe 3 seconds, rising just slightly in pitch, then cut off. And with it, the warmth vanished. I pressed my palm to the glass again, and now it felt normally cold. The pressure in my ears eased. The air in the room felt real again. My phone vibrated suddenly and lit up with full brightness, making me flinch. It was 2:23 a.m. I clicked it off and waited a few minutes before even thinking about turning lights on. When I finally went outside the next morning, I walked around to look at the siding below the window. Nothing was damaged. No scratches. No dirt smudges. But the snow around that side of the house looked subtly disturbed, like something had pressed down on it lightly in a line pattern, then lifted off without fully stepping. Not footprints. Not paw prints. Just shallow impressions, spaced unevenly, trailing toward the woods. That day, I kept checking the window from inside, running my fingers over the glass to see if any warmth remained. By afternoon, everything was normal temperature, like the whole thing had never happened. That night, I put my phone on the nightstand again, screen facing up. Before sleeping, I checked the time, 11:04. When I woke the next morning, the phone was face down. I never place it face down, and when I flipped it over, there was a notification waiting. Thermal change detected, 2:17 a.m. I tapped it, and the notification disappeared. No app had sent it. There was no history of it. No logs. Nothing. I didn't sleep with the curtains open for weeks. And now, whenever I hear the slightest tick against the house at night, tree branches, settling wood, even the furnace kicking on, I find myself checking the time first. 2:17 a.m. still feels like it's waiting for something. I noticed the red light about 15 minutes into my run, somewhere along the back trail behind the high school. It was close to 11 p.m., late enough that the whole neighborhood in Ridgefield had gone quiet. The weather was cool and dry, early fall, the kind of night where you can hear individual leaves scrape across the pavement. I usually jog after work to clear my head, but I'd procrastinated too long and ended up going out way later than planned. The trail curves around the soccer fields, cuts through a strip of woods, then circles a retention pond before reconnecting with the sidewalk. The only lighting out there is the occasional lamppost, and most of them flicker or buzz. I'm used to dark spots. About halfway through the wooded section, something caught my eye above the tree line. A faint red light drifting at the same pace I was running. My first thought was aircraft lights, but it was too low. Maybe 60 or 70 feet up, just above the tallest trees. It wasn't strobing or blinking, just a soft, steady glow about the size of a distant bicycle light. The strange part was how it kept exactly with me. Same speed, same relative position, like it was tethered. I slowed a little to see if it was just an illusion. The red light slowed too. I sped up again, pushing into a run, testing it. It matched me perfectly. My stomach tightened in that slow, creeping way where your brain understands something is wrong before you consciously do. I tried to come up with explanations as I jogged, maybe a drone, maybe somebody messing around. But there was no sound. If it were a drone that size and that low, I would have heard it. The woods were silent except for my breathing and the thud of my shoes on the path. I turned down the next curve in the trail. The trees opened up to a clearer view of the sky, and I saw the light more distinctly. Still red, still steady, still gliding at the exact pace I was. It wasn't bobbing or weaving the way drones do. The movement was too smooth. I reached the retention pond and ran along the water's edge. Part of me hoped the light would lag behind or reveal itself as something connected to the high school, some weird reflection I hadn't noticed before. Instead, it followed the curve of the pond right along with me. The surface of the water was calm, and instead of seeing the reflection of the light, I saw the faint shimmer of where it should have been, but nothing exact. Like the water recognized something was there, but couldn't reflect it correctly. That detail rattled me more than the light itself. When I hit the halfway mark around the pond, I was breathing hard and trying not to stare at the sky. The red glow tugged at my peripheral vision. Steady, patient. I told myself I'd stop when I reached the gap in the trees where the trail turned back toward the school. But as soon as I slowed from a run to a jog, the light dipped slightly lower. Not fast. Just enough to notice. I picked up speed instantly. It rose back into position, gliding above the tree line. My chest felt tight, not just from running. Something in the air felt charged, like static without the shock. My phone buzzed in my pocket suddenly, even though I wasn't receiving any notifications that time of night. The vibration felt strangely dull, like the motor was struggling. I didn't look at it, I just ran. When I reached the break in the trees, the trail funneled me toward the chain-link fence behind the baseball diamonds. Beyond that was a long stretch of open grass leading up to the back parking lot. I hesitated before stepping into the open space, but staying under the trees didn't feel safer. I jogged out into the field. The light came with me, maintaining height, maintaining distance. I finally forced myself to slow to a walk. The moment my pace dipped below running speed, the red light froze. Not drifted, not dimmed, it just stopped midair like someone hit pause. I stopped walking too. My breath puffed white in front of me. For a long moment, nothing moved. The whole field felt too still, the way a room feels right after someone whispers your name and you're not sure if you imagined it. Then the light blinked. It didn't go dark completely, more like it flickered in and out at irregular intervals, stretching in shape each time it reappeared, like it was elongating horizontally. I couldn't tell if it was moving or if my eyes were failing to track it. My phone buzzed again. This time it vibrated hard enough to startle me. I pulled it out of my pocket with clumsy fingers and saw the screen had turned on by itself. No notification, no app open, just the time. 11:42 p.m. I knew for a fact it had been 11:37 when I checked before leaving the house. 6 minutes unaccounted for. I hadn't stopped running long enough for that to make sense. I looked back up at the sky. The red light was gone. Nothing faded. Nothing drifted away. It simply wasn't there anymore. The tree line looked normal again. The field looked empty. Only the faint hum of the power lines along the road reached my ears, but even that sounded distant and weak, like the whole world was trying not to make too much noise. I stood there for at least a minute, my breathing too loud in my head. Then I forced myself to walk, quickly, toward the parking lot. Every few seconds I glanced up, expecting the red glow to reappear. The sky stayed blank. When I reached the lot, I saw two things that made my stomach drop all over again. First, the light pole nearest my car was flickering, but in a slow, rhythmic pattern. 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off. Not broken, not buzzing. Too precise. Second, my car's interior lights were already on. I never leave them on. I approached cautiously, checking if someone had broken in, but the doors were locked. When I got close enough to see through the window, the light turned off on its own. Not a fade. A clean click. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and got in. The seats were cold like normal, but the air inside felt slightly warmer than outside, as if someone had been sitting there breathing for a while. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 11:49 p.m., jumping ahead again from the time on my phone. I didn't wait to make sense of it. I drove home with one hand white-knuckling the wheel and the other hovering under the window, checking for any hint of light above me. Nothing followed me. But when I parked in my driveway and turned off the engine, my phone vibrated again. A new notification appeared for less than a second, barely long enough to read. Motion tracked 11:37 to 11:43 p.m. Then it vanished from the screen completely. No app claimed responsibility for it. No history. No log. I went inside without looking back at the sky. Now, when I run at night, which I still do, stupidly, I avoid the high school trail completely. But sometimes, even in other parts of town, I'll catch a faint red glow in my side vision. And every single time, I force myself not to speed up, not to test it, because I already know it knows when I change pace. I first noticed the distortion on my security camera when I was reviewing footage from the night before. I only checked because the motion alert had triggered at 2:11 a.m., and nothing ever triggers that camera except raccoons or the wind shaking the maple tree. My house sits on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Greenville, South Carolina, with a shallow creek running behind the yard. At night, it's usually dead silent except for water trickling through the rocks. When I opened the clip, the first thing I saw was the yard exactly as it should be, dimly lit by the back porch light I always leave on, the grass pale from frost. Nothing moving. No animals. No headlights from the road. Then the distortion slid into view. It started near the left edge of the frame. A wavy, glass-like shimmer, almost like heat, rising off asphalt. But it was 29 degrees out. The ripple was subtle enough that if I hadn't been watching closely, I might have mistaken it for bad compression. But it moved with intention, crossing the yard in a slow, perfectly straight line. I leaned closer to the screen. The timestamp read 2:11:14 a.m. The distortion thickened in the middle, forming a vague vertical shape, maybe 6 feet tall, maybe more. Not a silhouette, not a figure, just a disruption in the air, like the world behind it didn't know how to render properly. At 2:11:16 it paused, the porch light flickered once, and then the timestamp jumped. 24. 8 seconds missing. Clean cut. No transition. The distortion was gone. The yard looked normal again. The frost on the grass, the shadow of the fence, everything was exactly where it should be. But something about the silence in the clip felt too absolute, like even the background noise had been muted. My first thought was a glitch. Cameras freeze, timestamps skip. It happens. But when I scrubbed backward and forward, the recording didn't freeze. It cut. There was no buffering wheel, no compression artifacts, just missing time. I replayed it 3 times before I realized I was gripping the edge of my desk hard enough that my knuckles hurt. I switched to the live feed. The yard looked empty, calm. I scanned every inch of the frame. Then I noticed something off. The maple tree's shadow lay at a slightly different angle than in the recording, even though the porch light hadn't moved. It was subtle, but it made my stomach twist. I went outside with a flashlight. The cold hit me instantly. The yard looked normal. The air was crisp, the grass stiff under my shoes. But the moment I stepped off the patio, the hair on my arms lifted. No wind, no animals rustling, not even the creek. Total stillness. I swept the flashlight across the yard. The beam caught nothing unusual. No footprints in the frost except my own, no damage to the fence, no disturbed leaves. But when I pointed the light toward the far corner near the maple, the beam dimmed slightly, like the air there was denser. I stepped closer. The dimming followed me, like the flashlight was struggling to push through something. Not fog, not moisture, just a thickness in the space. I stopped 2 feet from the spot where the distortion had passed in the video. The creek, normally a soft constant in the background, made no sound. I crouched and touched the grass. It was warm. A small patch, maybe 2 feet wide, circled like someone had set a heating lamp above it. The frost around the patch had melted into dew, despite the freezing temperature. I jerked my hand back and stood up fast. The flashlight flickered. I backed up slowly toward the house, keeping the light on that area until I reached the patio. Once I stepped onto the concrete slab, the beam steadied again. The creek resumed its trickling sound. The air lightened. Inside, I checked the camera again. The distortion hadn't triggered a follow-up alert, but now the clip had a new icon next to it, one I'd never seen before. A little triangle with an exclamation point. I tapped it. A message popped up. Playback anomaly detected. Environmental interference. I stared at the screen. My cheap home camera shouldn't have diagnostics like that. If anything, it should have said, file corrupted. But environmental interference? What does that even mean? I checked the internet for similar messages, but nothing came up. My camera's manual didn't list that alert anywhere. I played the clip again, slowing it down to quarter speed. This time, I noticed something I'd missed. Right before the timestamp skip, the porch light cast 2 overlapping shadows on the fence behind the maple. One was the tree's shadow. The other was something taller, narrower, and curved at the top. It disappeared the same second the distortion vanished. My heartbeat hammered in my chest. The rest of the night, I barely slept. Every few minutes, I checked the live feed, waiting to see another shimmer pass through the yard. Nothing happened. But around 4 a.m., the camera made a soft click, its motor adjusting. I checked the notification log. Motion detected, 4:02 a.m. The clip showed nothing. No distortion, no animals, no wind. Just a faint warping around the edge of the frame that didn't move or behave like anything physical. I stopped watching after that. The next morning, I walked the yard again in daylight. The warm patch had frozen over, now glittering like ordinary frost. Everything looked normal. But when I touched the maple's bark, specifically the side facing the house, it felt slightly warm under my hand. Not enough to be unnatural, but enough to make me pull my hand away quickly. That night, I set the camera sensitivity to maximum. At 1:58 a.m., another motion alert woke me. My stomach dropped before I even opened the app. This time, the distortion didn't move across the yard. It flickered in place near the center of the frame, swelling and sinking like a slow breath. The timestamp shifted again. Only 4 seconds this time, but still missing. 4 seconds gone. Then the distortion collapsed inward like someone crushing a soap bubble. The porch light dimmed by half for 2 beats of my heart and returned to normal. No alert message, no environmental interference warning, just the video. At 2:17 a.m., I heard the creak again, louder than usual, like it had suddenly rushed back into normal time. I didn't go outside. I didn't look out the window. After the 3rd night of small, flickering anomalies, I shut the camera off entirely. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I did. Sometimes, late at night, when the house settles and the outside goes quiet, the air feels thick for a moment, pressurized, like the world is holding its breath. And in those moments, I swear I can picture the distortion stepping across the yard again, unseen, except by a lens that now sits unplugged in my drawer. I first noticed the stars blurring when I stepped out of my tent to take a leak. It was late September, unseasonably warm during the day, but cold enough at night for the air to sting a little when you breathed too deeply. I was camping alone at a small, primitive site off the Green River Lakes Trail in Wyoming. Nothing fancy, just a flat patch of ground near the pines with a fire ring someone else had built years ago. It was close to midnight. I'd gone to bed early after hiking most of the afternoon, and I woke up with that dry throat feeling you get when the temperature drops fast. The forest was dead quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing but the occasional creak of cooling branches. When I unzipped the tent and stepped out, the stars overhead were so bright it felt like you could reach out and stir them with your hand. The Milky Way cut a thick band across the sky. It was one of the reasons I loved camping out there. I stood there for a moment just looking up. That's when the stars directly above me began to smear. Not move. Not dim. Smear. Just slightly out of focus, like the sky had fogged up or my eyes had suddenly gone bad. I blinked hard, rubbed my face, looked again. The blur shifted. It slid a few inches to the left, slow but deliberate, like something transparent was drifting across the sky and dragging the starlight with it. The shape wasn't clear, but the distortion had edges. Subtle, rounded edges like an oval or a dome. My first thought was that clouds had rolled in without sound, but there were no clouds. The rest of the sky was untouched, sharp, bright, normal. Only the patch above me rippled. I watched, rooted to the spot. My breath had gone shallow without me realizing it. The distortion kept sliding, a long, quiet sweep across the stars. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like heat waves, but heat waves don't drift across cold mountain air at midnight. Heat waves don't erase stars behind them. I didn't hear anything. No engines, no wind, no movement through the trees. Just the soft scrape of my boot shifting on the dirt as I took an involuntary step back. The blurred patch glided another few degrees across the sky, then, without warning, stopped. Completely. The stars inside it almost returned to focus, but not quite. Like something was trying to mimic the sky and wasn't getting it right. A low pressure built in my ears then. Not a sound, just that thick, muted feeling you get in airplanes before they pop. Except they didn't pop. It stayed, pressing inward. I glanced around camp, half expecting to see an animal, but the forest felt frozen. Even the air seemed to be holding its breath. When I looked back up, the blurred patch began to move again. This time faster. It wasn't drifting now. It was slipping away, like someone pulling a sheet across the sky. The stars sharpened behind it as it moved, snapping back into clarity one by one. The distortion slid toward the western horizon, thinning as it went. Not fading exactly, just blending back into the night until it was indistinguishable from the darkness around it. And then it was gone. Instantly gone. The pressure in my ears released a second later. The forest sounds returned, very faint at first, a rustle in the brush, a distant pop from cooling rock, a soft breeze I hadn't felt before. It was like the world turned back on. I stood there for probably a full minute before I realized my hands were trembling. I zipped the tent closed, crawled inside, and sat with my back against my sleeping bag, breathing slowly. Every few seconds I'd glance upward, even though all I could see was the tent fabric glowing faintly from the moonlight. My body felt wired, every nerve on standby. Eventually I lay down, but I didn't sleep. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard something overhead. Not footsteps, not wings. More like a soft, rolling thump, one gentle, downward pressure of air. It wasn't loud, but I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. The tent sagged just slightly, like a single puff of wind had pressed down, then released. I froze, eyes open in the dark. A faint shimmer passed across the tent roof, barely noticeable, just a momentary change in how the moonlight filtered through the fabric, a ripple of shadow that shouldn't have been there. Then nothing. Absolute stillness. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke again around dawn to birdsong and cold air. Everything looked normal. My tent was dry, the fire ring cold, the trees ordinary. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the sky. Clear blue. No sign of anything unusual. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the blur, that maybe thin clouds had passed by in perfect silence. But when I bent down to pack up my gear, I noticed something in the dust beside my tent. A shallow depression, oval-shaped, maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide. Not deep, just enough to where the pine needles inside it were pressed flat. The edges were too smooth to be an animal print. And there wasn't a second one. Nothing leading to it or away from it. Just a single, perfect indentation. I touched it. The ground inside felt slightly warm. Everything else around it was freezing. I didn't stay long. I hiked out faster than I ever had before, looking over my shoulder every few minutes, even though the trail was empty. That night at home, I sat outside on my porch and tried to look at the stars the way I always had, but I kept watching for that subtle blur, that wrongness in the sky. That quiet slide of something transparent drifting exactly where it shouldn't be. I haven't camped alone since. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Flagstaff and decided to stop at one of those little scenic pull-offs along Highway 180. It was around 9:45 p.m., early spring, the kind of night that's cold but not biting, with a thin of clouds glowing faintly from the moon behind them. I'd been on the road for a couple of hours and needed a break before pushing through the last stretch home to Williams. The overlook was empty, not unusual for a weeknight. It's just a gravel turnout with a wooden fence and a faded sign naming whatever mountain ridge you can usually see in daylight. At night, it's basically a parking spot with a view of black shapes. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, letting my eyes adjust. The air was still. No breeze, no highway noise, just a soft ringing in my ears from driving too long. Then the car rocked. Not hard, not like someone kicked it, more like a single, gentle push, like the kind of nudge you'd feel from a strong gust of wind, except the air didn't move. The trees by the fence didn't stir, not even a twitch. My air freshener hanging from the mirror didn't sway. I straightened up, gripping the steering wheel without realizing it. My first thought was that maybe the suspension shifted after I parked, but my old Camry had never done that before. I listened for footsteps, expecting maybe some late-night hiker or someone messing around, but the gravel outside stayed quiet. A few seconds later, the interior dim light flickered. Just once. A quick pulse. Not enough to go out, just enough to make me notice it. I checked the battery indicator on the dashboard out of habit. Everything looked fine. That's when I saw the pale light overhead. It was faint at first, like a patch of cloud caught a little too much moonlight. But the moon was mostly covered, and this glow had a shape to it. A rounded brightness, soft at the edges, drifting slowly behind the layer of clouds. Not fast enough to be a plane, not blinking, just gliding. I rolled down the window halfway, thinking maybe I'd hear a helicopter or something. Nothing. The silence outside was thick, like the air had weight to it. The glow moved with a smoothness that made my stomach tighten. It didn't wobble or change size. It didn't scatter across the clouds like normal light. It stayed perfectly round as it drifted. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a reflection from another car, but I was alone. Maybe someone shining a flashlight from farther down the pull-off. But there was no beam, no point of origin, nothing except the pale, circular light slipping along the underside of the clouds. Then it paused, right above me. The car didn't move this time, but I felt something, like a drop in pressure. The same sensation as being in an elevator that stops too fast. My ears tightened, my breathing felt shallow. I wasn't scared exactly, more like frozen in that way where your mind refuses to pick a reaction. The glow held still, perfectly still. I leaned forward to look up through the windshield. The clouds directly overhead seemed thinner? No, more like I was seeing through a layer of smoke instead of solid cloud. The shape behind it looked clearer now, sharper around the edges than it should have been. And then the glow started drifting again, slow, careful, like it was scanning. The pressure in my ears released all at once. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. As the light moved away, the interior of my car dimmed slightly, like the world outside was sucking in whatever brightness existed naturally. The dome light faded, not off, just dulled, and then returned to normal a few seconds later, that perfectly in sync with the glow slipping farther behind the cloud cover. I wanted to start the engine. I really did, but my hands stayed frozen on my knees. Something in me told me not to move, like sudden motion would draw attention. The glow reached the edge of the cloud bank and lingered there, not moving, not fading, just hovering behind the thinnest patch of cloud, as if it were waiting. I swallowed hard, and finally leaned over to hit the lock button on the door. It beeped louder than I expected. The glow reacted. It slid, fast this time, just a short, smooth dart to the left. Not enough distance to feel like it was fleeing. More like a curious adjustment. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my neck. The glow steadied again, held. The pressure in the air built back up, not as strong as before, but enough to make my ears feel full. I looked at the trees, half expecting them to bend or sway. They didn't move at all. The branches were rigid silhouettes, pointing upward. A cold feeling crawled down my arms. Not fear exactly, more like the sense of being noticed. I cracked the window a little farther and listened. Nothing. Total silence. Then, softly, there was a sound. A low vibration under the noise floor. Not a hum, not mechanical. More like feeling a bass note in your chest when the volume is too low to hear. The air had a texture to it. I shut the window again. When I looked up, the glow was shifting. This time upward. Not drifting horizontally, but rising. Very slowly, like it was being pulled straight back into the clouds. It climbed until it was barely visible through the haze. Then it faded, not abruptly, just thinning out, lighter and lighter. until the cloud cover looked normal again. I sat there for a long time before I turned the key in the ignition. As soon as the engine started, the dome light flickered again. Twice. I drove out of the overlook at a steady pace, resisting the urge to floor it. My headlights cut through the empty highway as if nothing strange had happened at all. About a mile down the road, my rearview mirror dimmed automatically like it does for bright headlights, but there were no headlights behind me. No cars, just darkness. The mirror stayed dimmed for another 20 seconds before returning to normal. When I got home, I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. The car didn't rock this time. The air felt ordinary. The sky above my neighborhood was empty. Before going inside, I looked up one more time, scanning the clouds. No glow, no movement, nothing. Still, I locked every door and window in the house before I went to bed. And I didn't sleep for a long time. I was sitting by Lake Meriden the night it happened. The kind of early autumn evening where the cold sneaks in slowly and the air feels thinner than usual. My friend Caleb had invited me to come camping with him and his girlfriend, but work ran late, and by the time I made it out there, both of them were already asleep in their tent across the clearing. I didn't feel like crawling into mine yet, so I pulled a folding chair near the shoreline and just sat there listening to the water push up against the rocks. There wasn't much wind. The surface of the lake looked flat, almost glassy, reflecting the moon in long, shaky lines. I remember thinking how still everything felt. Even the tree line across the lake looked like a silhouette drawn in marker, too sharp, too still. I'd been sitting there maybe 15 minutes when the glow appeared. It started as a faint smudge under the water, maybe 20 yards out. At first I thought it was moonlight catching on something, maybe a sandbar or a shallow patch. But the glow strengthened, gathering into a defined shape. Not round, not anything recognizable, more like a thin band of white light, soft at the edges, cutting across the dark water. I leaned forward a little, trying not to make any noise. The glow moved, not drifting, not bobbing, moving in a perfectly straight line at a steady pace, like it was following a track laid beneath the lake. It didn't ripple the surface. It didn't disturb the water at all. It just slid forward, brightening slightly as it went. I checked behind me, wondering if someone had turned on a lantern or a flashlight, but the campsite was dark. Caleb and Jenna's tent was zipped up tight, no shadows inside. My own lantern was off. When I looked back, the glow had covered another few yards, still keeping the exact same depth under the surface, maybe 3 or 4 feet down. I could see the rocks on the lake bed above it, faintly lit from below like stage lights. The water stayed completely calm. My brain scrambled for explanations. A boat? Some kind of underwater drone? But nothing mechanical moved like that. Slow, silent, perfectly level. And the shape wasn't solid. It looked more like light bending through clear plastic, except there was no plastic and no object. Just the glow. I stood up without meaning to. My chair scraped softly against the dirt. The glow kept moving, unaffected. That detail has stuck with me more than anything. It didn't react to me at all. Not when I stood, not when I stepped closer to the water's edge. It was as if I wasn't even there. The glow advanced until it was maybe 10 yards out. Close enough that I could make out the lake floor, pale rocks, long weeds drifting slightly, lit by this strange, directionless brightness. Then it began to fade, not suddenly, just thinning, like fog dissolving. The straight line movement didn't change. It kept sliding forward, even as it dimmed until the last visible trace of it vanished into darkness. It disappeared well before it reached the shore, like whatever caused it had stopped just short of touching land. I stayed there another minute, staring at the spot where it should have emerged. Nothing. No bubbles, no fish scattering, no sound, just still water and moonlight. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. Not from cold, I'd barely noticed the temperature until then. Behind me, a tent zipper sounded. Caleb's head popped out. "Dude, are you okay?" he whispered. I turned around too fast. "Did you see that?" "See what?" "The light. Under the water." He squinted past me toward the lake. "I didn't see anything. You good?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Trying to explain it out loud felt impossible. Like the moment I described it, it would stop being something real and turn into a weird story people shrug off. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'm fine." He watched me a second longer, then ducked back into the tent. The zipper rasped shut and everything went quiet again. I didn't go back to the chair. I walked along the shoreline instead, scanning the water. Every few steps I stopped and crouched, waiting to see even a flicker of that glow. Lake Meriden was still and dark, the kind of darkness water takes on when the moon hides behind thin clouds. Nothing appeared. But while I stood there, feeling the cold seep through my jacket, I realized something else. The lake smelled different. Usually it had that strong mineral smell, like every bit of vegetation had been soaking for a century. But now it smelled faint, neutral, almost clean. The air felt heavy too, dense in a way I'd only ever experienced before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a storm in sight. I walked the shoreline until my toes went numb, then forced myself back to the campsite. I sat in my tent with the lantern low, trying to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the fabric walls, half expecting to see light bleed through from somewhere outside. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I woke up early and walked to the lake again. The water looked exactly like it always did. A few ducks paddled near the reeds. Someone farther down the shore was casting a fishing line into the shallows. I walked to the exact spot where I'd seen the glow disappear. The rocks looked ordinary. The water was so clear I could see the bottom. Nothing unusual, nothing disturbed. When Caleb came over with coffee, he asked again if I was sure I'd been okay the night before. I told him I just hadn't slept well. He shrugged and didn't push it. Before we packed up camp, I took one last look at the lake. I don't know what I expected. A weird ripple, a patch of discolored water, anything. But it looked peaceful. Normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that while I'd been staring at it, something deep under the surface had been staring back. I haven't been back since. I first heard the hum on a muggy July night at my place outside Natchez, Mississippi. I live a little ways off the main road, in a house my uncle left me. One story, sagging porch, and a yard that blends into the woods because I never bother mowing the back half. Summer nights out there are loud. Cicadas, crickets, frogs, all layered together until it feels like the whole place is breathing. That night, everything stopped breathing. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through my phone with the window cracked open for airflow. The air outside was thick and warm, the kind that sticks to your skin. I wasn't thinking about anything except how tired I was and how early I had to be up the next morning. Then I felt something before I heard it, a vibration. Subtle at first, like the way a bass line feels when someone drives by with their stereo turned up, except it didn't come from any direction. It settled in my chest, almost like a second slower heartbeat, and then the sound came. A hum. Low, steady, and impossible to place. Not mechanical, not natural, just a tone, hanging in the air without rising or falling. The window glass trembled slightly. My kitchen table seemed to buzz under my arms, but outside, silence. Absolute silence. Every insect sound had cut out the moment the hum began. At first, I thought maybe a transformer was blowing in the distance, but I didn't smell ozone and there was no flicker from the lights. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The hum grew stronger near the glass, like the pain was conducting it. I pushed the window open all the way. The sound deepened, not louder, deeper, like it was sinking into me rather than passing through the air. My ribcage felt tight. My breath came shallow without me choosing it. The woods behind my house were pitch black, but I could sense that something wasn't right. The darkness felt thick, as if whatever made the noise was absorbing light instead of producing it. I stepped outside onto the porch. The hum sharpened, not painfully but noticeably, and the boards under my feet vibrated. The porch swing rattled against its chains. Yet the air around me stayed still, not even a hint of breeze. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Then, from somewhere above the yard, a soft glow pulsed. I didn't see its source, just the effect. A pale, diffuse light washed over the treetops for half a second, like distant heat lightning, but without the sky lighting up. The leaves shone silver for a moment, then dulled. The hum shifted, rising just a fraction of a tone. It wasn't directional, but my body turned instinctively toward the far end of the yard, where the grass grows taller and the old garden fence leans at an angle. I couldn't see anything unusual with that, but the vibration pressed harder against my sternum, as if guiding me or nudging me. I took one step off the porch. The hum surged. Not louder, but fuller, almost resonant. My legs tingled from the knees down. I froze. Something felt wrong about moving toward the tree line. Not dangerous exactly, more like I was stepping into a space I wasn't supposed to occupy. Another light pulsed, this time behind the clouds. It was so faint I might have missed it if I hadn't already been staring upward. A pale smear of brightness, barely there, sliding behind the cloud layer in a slow arc. It didn't flicker like lightning. It didn't fade like moonlight. It drifted, steady and round-edged, until the clouds swallowed it completely. The hum reacted again, dropping suddenly in pitch. That shift hit me harder than the others. My chest tightened. My ears felt like they needed to pop, but couldn't. I stumbled back a step onto the bottom porch stair, and then the sound cut out, instantly. The absence of it was like having a weight ripped off me. I gasped, grabbing the railing. For half a heartbeat, the world was so quiet that I thought I'd gone deaf. Then every insect in the woods started chirping again at the same exact moment. No gradual return, just a full, overwhelming blast of sound after the silence. Cicadas, crickets, tree frogs. The whole night chorus crashing back in like someone flipped a switch. The contrast made my head spin. I stood on the porch staring into the dark yard until my breathing calmed. Everything looked normal again. The porch swing hung still. The trees rustled faintly in the returning night breeze. Nothing glowed. Nothing moved. I went back inside, locked the door without thinking, and sat there at the table trying to convince myself it was something explainable. A distant engine. A pressure system. An illusion. But then my phone buzzed. Not a notification, just the haptic buzz it makes when I tap the screen. Except I hadn't touched it. The phone screen had lit up on its own, showing the time, 11:23 p.m. The battery indicator flickered once, dimming and brightening. I watched it until the screen went dark. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept listening for the hum to return, even though the insects outside had settled into their usual rhythms. The next morning, I walked the yard. I expected to see nothing, and at first that's exactly what I got. The grass moved normally in the breeze. The fence leaned the way it always had. The woods looked as unremarkable as ever. Then, I found a patch of ground near the center of the yard where the soil felt warm. Not hot, not burned, just warmer than everything around it. The sunlight hadn't reached that part yet, so it couldn't have been that. When I pressed my palm down, the warmth seemed to spread a little, like the earth was radiating leftover heat from something. It made me pull my hand back fast. I checked the rest of the yard. Nothing similar, just that one patch. Later that afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Langley, waved me over while she watered her plants. She asked if I'd heard that engine last night. I asked what she meant. She said it sounded like something big and slow passing overhead, but she didn't see any lights. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and said maybe it was a plane. But the nearest airport is 40 minutes away, and nothing that flies around here makes a sound you feel in your bones. That night, I kept the windows shut. Around 11 p.m., I found myself holding my breath without realizing it, waiting. But the hum didn't return. The insects kept chirping. The air stayed still. Eventually, I went to bed, but I slept facing the window, watching the faint glow of the yard outside, waiting for the silence. I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from my friend Mason. "Did you see that thing over your house?" I stared at it for a second, trying to make sense of what he meant. I hadn't heard anything outside. No helicopters, no sirens, not even the neighbor's dog barking. My house sits in a pretty quiet neighborhood outside Bozeman, mostly families and retirees, so anything unusual usually gets noticed fast. Before I could reply, he sent another. "Dude, look outside. That one hit different." I felt my chest tighten a little, the way it does right before you expect bad news. I grabbed my hoodie and stepped out onto the front porch. The first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. No wind, no cars on the road, no distant highway echo, just stillness. Even the crickets, which are always loud this time of year, sounded muted somehow, like they were chirping from underwater. Then I saw it. A dim, vertical line of light, very faint, almost like a reflection, hovering above the peak of my roof. For a second, I honestly thought it was a trick of the street lamp. But the street lamp was behind me, and this thing was straight up, centered perfectly above my house. The light didn't spread outward like a beam. It didn't glow in pulses. It was just There, a thin column of pale grayish white, maybe 10 or 15 feet tall, hanging in the air without touching anything. I stepped off the porch, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The sound seemed too loud. The air felt thick, like the moment before a winter storm when pressure drops all at once. As I moved farther into the yard, the light shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight tremor, like it adjusted its position. Then it rose. Slowly, smoothly, as if being lifted by something invisible. It didn't wobble or flicker. It just went upward at a steady pace. I felt my mouth go dry. I wanted to call Mason, but my eyes wouldn't leave the thing. It climbed past the roofline and toward the low cloud cover drifting overhead. The glow got softer as it rose, fading gradually into the gray sky. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow enough to feel natural either. It reminded me of watching an elevator from far away, controlled, deliberate. Right before it reached the clouds, something strange happened. The light paused. Not long, maybe 1 second. But it stopped completely, holding in place like it was considering something. The air temperature dropped at the same time, enough that I felt goosebumps rise under my hoodie. Then, just as quiet as it had been the whole time, the light slipped upward into the clouds and vanished. No sound, no trail, nothing left behind. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for something else to happen. Waiting for a plane to appear, or a helicopter, or even a shooting star, something to make sense of it. But the sky went back to being just a sky. Then my porch light flickered. Once. It wasn't a power issue. I knew that immediately. It was too clean, too precise. A single blink. As if acknowledging something. That flicker broke whatever spell I'd been under. I walked backward toward the porch, scanning the sky. The clouds drifted normally. The silence eased up. The crickets got louder again, back to their usual rhythm. A truck drove by on the main road 2 blocks over. The world resumed. I finally checked my phone again. I had another text from Mason. "It shot straight up, man. Thought it was going to hit your roof." I typed back, "I saw it. It just left." He read it immediately, but didn't respond right away. After a minute, he sent, "Did your lights flicker too?" That stopped me. I hadn't told him about the porch light. I asked what he meant. He said his living room lamps blinked at the same moment the thing rose into the clouds. Twice, in his case. He said his dog whined and hid under the coffee table. As he told me this, I glanced at my porch light again. It flickered a second time. A soft, slow dimming and brightening. Almost like breathing. I stepped back inside and locked the door. Not because I thought it would help, just because it felt like the normal thing to do when something abnormal is happening. I tried turning on the TV, but the screen took a few seconds longer than usual to light up. My phone lagged when I opened the messaging app. Every device felt just slightly off, like they were recovering from something electrical I hadn't felt. Around midnight, I looked out my bedroom window one more time. The street was quiet, houses dark, sky empty. But I kept thinking about how the light moved, straight up like it had a place to be. No curve, no drift, no hesitation except that tiny pause before disappearing. It wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic. It felt intentional. I didn't sleep much. Every time a car passed or a branch tapped my siding, I found myself looking back at the window, half expecting to see that pale vertical glow hanging there again, waiting. I was driving a long, empty stretch of desert highway late one night, the kind of road where you can go 20 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. It had rained earlier, so the air was cool and smelled like wet dust. The sky was clear except for a thin band of haze near the horizon. I was on my way back from visiting a coworker who lived way out past the last cluster of houses, and I was already thinking about how exhausted I'd be in the morning. I rounded a slow curve, my high beams catching the reflective posts on the shoulder. Everything looked normal until something flickered high above the road, so far up I almost missed it. At first I thought it was just the reflection off a plane or maybe a distant tower light. But as I drove a little farther, my headlights hit it again. And this time, it reflected back in a way that didn't make sense for anything that high above ground. The light bounced off something metallic, not a shape I could identify, just a brief angled gleam, like my headlights had caught the corner of a huge piece of aluminum hovering hundreds of feet in the air. It was only visible for a split second before the darkness swallowed it again. I let off the gas. I didn't brake, but I slowed down enough to feel the shift in momentum. The road was flat for miles ahead, so I rolled down my window and leaned forward, searching the sky. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to accelerate again, the reflection appeared a second time. This time I saw more of it. A slanted edge, smooth, sharp, not rounded like a balloon or curved like a drone. It was angled, like the side of a huge panel. It wasn't spinning or drifting either. It hung there completely still, tilted slightly toward me, like it had caught the beams of my headlights and turned just enough to return them. My first thought was some kind of weather equipment, but there were no towers out there, no power lines, nothing tall enough for anything to be suspended from. The nearest town was an hour behind me. I pulled onto the shoulder and turned off the engine. The silence hit hard. I could hear the cooling tick of the hood and nothing else. No wind, no insects, just quiet desert night. I stepped out of the car. The air felt heavy when I closed the door behind me. Not thick, exactly, more like the atmosphere itself had tightened. The sky above the road was black, except for stars, clean and sharp. I kept staring in the direction where I'd seen the reflection, half expecting it to shine again. Then, almost too faint to catch, something shifted. The metallic surface tilted. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle adjustment, like someone rotating a giant mirror a few degrees. But the tilt let the starlight catch it this time, not my headlights, and for a moment the shape outlined itself as a narrow, elongated object. I couldn't make out the full size, but it felt big, much bigger than a plane. It hung motionless. I realized my hands were trembling a little, though I wasn't cold. I kept listening for any noise, an engine, blades, anything, but the air stayed silent. Even the occasional far-off hum of the highway seemed gone. The object tilted again, like slightly upward this time. Then it rose. Not fast, not slow, just instantly upward without speeding up. Like one frame it was there, the next frame it was higher, and the movement between those frames was perfectly smooth. No acceleration curve, no buildup. It just went up. I felt a tight pressure in my chest, the kind you get before a panic attack. The object climbed higher, straight through the air, maintaining the same soft metallic shimmer from the stars. It passed through a thin patch of haze, the glow bending around it for a second, and then it vanished. Not faded, not blinked out. It was there one moment and gone the next, like someone hit a switch. The pressure in my chest released at the same time. The air around me felt normal again. A small breeze finally drifted across the road, carrying the smell of rain-soaked dirt. In the distance, I heard an insect buzz like the world had just resumed. I stood there a while, staring at the empty sky, trying to convince myself it was some kind of aircraft with strange lighting, or a satellite doing something weird with atmospheric distortion. But nothing I came up with matched the way it moved. Eventually, I got back in the car. My headlights swept over the asphalt and scrub brush as if nothing unusual had happened at all. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, engine idling, telling myself I needed to get home. When I pulled back onto the road, the radio crackled once, just a short burst of static, and then went quiet. The station didn't return until several miles later. I didn't see any other reflections in the sky for the rest of the drive. The night felt normal again, routine, predictable. But every time I passed a stretch of open highway with no lights around, I found myself glancing up, checking for something metallic hanging perfectly still in the dark, just in case it was still there. I woke up sometime around 3 in the morning, the kind of sudden waking where your body doesn't ease into consciousness, it just snaps alert. My room was quiet, except for the faint ringing in my ears I always get when everything's dead silent. I thought maybe a noise outside had woken me, but I didn't hear anything now. The first thing I noticed was the curtains. They were open just enough for a sliver of moonlight to cut across the floor. I always close them fully before bed. Not because I'm paranoid or anything, but my bedroom faces the woods behind my house, and I don't like waking up to stray light or the silhouette of branches moving. But the curtains were clearly pulled back, just 2 or 3 inches. Enough that I could see the outline of the trees outside. I sat up slowly, my heart pacing faster than it should have. The room still felt warm from the day, but my skin prickled like a cold draft had touched it. I stared at that narrow opening in the curtains, trying to remember if I'd gotten up at some point without realizing it. I was sure I hadn't. When I leaned forward to look out the window, something faint moved above the treetops. It was a glow, soft, gray-white, with no clear shape. Not bright enough to light the yard, just enough to outline the top of the pines as it drifted upward. For a few seconds it hovered there, barely visible through the haze of moonlight. Then it pulled away smoothly, rising over the tips of the trees and slipping into the sky like fog being carried off. The glow didn't flicker or pulse. It didn't leave a trail. It just faded as it climbed, disappearing into the thin layer of clouds overhead. I found myself holding my breath until the last trace of it vanished. I waited, staring out through that gap. The woods looked normal. Dark, still, the branches unmoving, but something felt off. The air wasn't right. It felt heavier than usual, like the atmosphere had thickened without changing temperature. I finally got out of bed and walked to the window. When I touched the curtain fabric where it had been pulled back, it felt warm. Warmer than the rest of the room, like someone's hand had been there not long ago. That detail bothered me more than the glow. I pulled the curtains fully open and pressed my forehead to the glass. The forest behind my house was 100 yards deep before the land dipped into a creek bed. On windy nights, you can hear the rush of water, but right then it was silent. Not even an insect chirp, no rustling, just stillness. Then I noticed the moonlight was shifting. It wasn't the clouds, it wasn't the trees. The light itself looked slightly diluted, the shadows softer than they should have been, like the brightness was being filtered by something faint and high in the air. I stepped back from the window. My heartbeat had become uncomfortably loud. I didn't want to turn on the bedroom light. Something about the idea of illuminating myself made me feel exposed, so I walked quietly to the hallway instead. As soon as I opened the bedroom door, the house felt different, cooler, sharper somehow, as if the air had just been stirred. I checked each room, looking out every window. The backyard looked the same from every angle. No lights, no movement, no obvious disturbances. When I got to the kitchen, I touched the sliding glass door. The glass felt slightly warm too, just like the curtains. My dog, Harley, usually sleeps in the living room and barks at anything unusual, but he was curled up on the couch, awake, staring at the back door with his ears pinned back. Not growling, not barking, just watching with a kind of tense focus I'd never seen in him before. I whispered his name. His head turned toward me, but he didn't make a sound. That's when I heard a low noise outside. Not loud, not threatening. More like a soft electrical hum, except it wasn't steady. It rose and fell almost like breathing, slow, deliberate. It seemed to come from above the tree line, not from the ground. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then it stopped abruptly. And when it stopped, the woods came back to life. Crickets started chirping all at once, as if someone had unmuted the world. A breeze moved through the branches, and the shadows started shaking the way they always do. I stood there listening to the sudden return of normal nighttime noise. Harley relaxed a little, though he didn't take his eyes off the window. I slid the back door open an inch. The cool air drifted in. Everything smelled normal. Pine, damp earth, a little hint of rain that must have passed earlier. But the air felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike, except the sky was clear now. I stepped out onto the deck. The glow was gone. No lights above the trees, no movement in the branches, just stars, clouds, and the faint sound of the creek. Then I noticed something on the deck railing. A smear. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't sap. It was a faint, pale residue, almost like chalk dust, but slightly iridescent when the moon hit it. It formed a short line, maybe 2 inches long, as though something had brushed against the wood. I touched it with my thumb. It was warm. Not just warm. Warm like it had been touched by something with its own heat, not the sun's. The moment I rubbed it, the residue thinned and vanished, leaving the wood clean. I stared at the railing for a long time, my thumb still tingling faintly. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back inside, locked every window, and sat awake on the couch with Harley until dawn. Every so often, he'd lift his head and look toward the back door again, like he was waiting for something to return. As the sky got lighter, I checked the curtains in my bedroom again. The fabric had cooled. No residue. Nothing strange. But the gap was still there, pulled back just slightly, exactly the way I'd found it. I kept staring at that opening, thinking about the glow rising over the trees and the hum that seemed to breathe through the air. and the warm residue on the railing, like something had been close, very close. The power went out a little after 10 p.m. I was sitting in my living room in Elma, Washington, watching some rerun I'd already seen twice when everything just shut off. The TV, the lights, the fridge humming in the kitchen. The whole house went silent in a way that felt heavier than it should have. We get outages sometimes after storms, but it had been a calm evening, just cold and clear. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and looked out the front window. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no car headlights, nothing. Even the Harrington place across the way, who always left that giant barn lamp on, was completely black. I figured it was one of those grid failures that takes a few minutes to resolve, but after 10 minutes, the neighborhood stayed dark. I decided to step outside and check if anyone else was awake. The air hit me immediately, sharp, cold, and still. Normally you can hear the sawmill in the distance or a dog barking across the fields, but the night felt muted, like someone had put a thick blanket over the whole town. I walked down my porch steps and stood in the gravel driveway. That's when I noticed the sky. Most of it was just stars, pale through the winter air. But one patch, almost directly above the field behind my house, was glowing. Not bright, not enough to light the ground. Just a faint, diffused blue, like a thin veil of color hanging above the tree line. It didn't pulse or flicker. It just held steady, with soft edges that blurred into the darker sky around it. At first, I thought maybe it was the moon behind clouds, but the moon was visible off to the east, a sharp white crescent. This glow wasn't shaped anything like that. It was more like a circular stain of color, hovering in place. I took a few steps toward the backyard to get a better angle. The blue patch stayed exactly where it was, not shifting with my movement, not reflecting anything from the ground. It felt high, far higher than a streetlight reflection could reach. As I stared up, the air around me felt not colder, but tighter somehow, like a pressure change before a storm. My breathing grew shallow without my noticing. The gravel under my shoes felt slightly vibrating, though that might have been my imagination. Then something strange happened. The insects went silent. Even in winter, we get a few hardy ones clicking and chirping in the brush, but all at once, they stopped. The silence dropped so suddenly that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The field behind the house, usually full of quiet movement from deer or raccoons, felt empty. I kept watching the glow. It didn't expand or dim. It hovered, a perfect, unnatural stillness in the sky. A faint sound rose up then, so faint I almost missed it. A thin, high-frequency hiss, like electricity moving through wires, except there were no wires active anywhere around me. It wasn't loud enough to hurt, but I could feel it, like it was traveling through the air more than through my ears. The blow of warm breath fogged in front of me, and for a moment the fog backlit itself slightly blue, catching the color from above. I took another step backward. Right then, the glow shifted. Not in any direction, just drained, like someone was slowly turning down a dimmer switch. The blue dissolved evenly, losing saturation until the sky looked normal again. The hiss tapered out with it, fading into a low-pressure hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And all at once, the insects chirped again. A second later, the neighborhood roared back to life. Houses flickered with light. My porch lamp snapped on. The Harrington's barn floodlight blasted across the yard. My living room TV restarted loud enough that I heard the theme song through the wall. I stood in the driveway blinking at the sudden brightness. It felt like stepping from a dream back into a normal night. I turned back to the field. The sky above it looked completely ordinary. No blue, no distortion, just stars. But something in the air still felt wrong. I walked to the back fence, crunching through patches of frozen grass. The field was still dark. The Harringtons' light didn't reach that far. In the snow-dusted dirt near the fence line, I saw an odd mark, an oval-shaped patch of melted frost, maybe 2 feet wide. The rest of the ground around it was crunchy and frozen, but this one spot looked damp, as if it had been warmed briefly. When I touched the soil, it felt cold again, only slightly softer than the surrounding ground. Nothing alarming, nothing obviously artificial, just out of place. I looked up once more. The sky above me gave no sign anything unusual had happened, but the thought lodged in my mind anyway. Whatever had lit up that patch of sky had done so without lighting up anything underneath it. Back inside, every device rebooted like the power had only been out for a second or two, even though I knew it had to be closer to 20 minutes. My phone showed no service for a full minute before the signal bars came back. When they did, a text came through from my friend Laura across town. "Did your power just come back? There was some weird blue thing in the sky. Thought it was just me." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Before I could type a reply, the house's lights dimmed for half a second, just a tiny flicker, and returned to normal. Nothing else happened the rest of the night. I stayed up a long time, though, watching the windows, checking the sky every few minutes. Everything stayed quiet, normal. But the next morning on my way to the truck, I noticed something near the back fence again. A new patch of melted frost. Smaller this time. Perfectly round, still damp, and nowhere near where the sun would have warmed the ground that early. I touched it. It was slightly warm, just like the glow above the field. I was driving home from a late shift on Highway 12, the stretch that winds through the hills west of Morton. It was close to 1 in the morning, early spring, the air cold enough that fog clung low to the ground in slow-moving sheets. I'd driven that road hundreds of times, but that night, something about it felt different. Quieter than usual, heavier somehow, like the darkness had soaked into everything. The fog thickened as I climbed one of the small rises in the road. My high beams could barely cut through it, and every few seconds I'd slow down more than I needed to, just to be safe. Even the radio static felt oddly loud in the silence around me. At the top of the hill, I saw headlights ahead. At first, they looked like normal oncoming lights, bright, white, steady. But as I continued driving, the lights didn't seem to get any closer. The fog made it impossible to tell how far away they were, but the brightness stayed exactly the same. Not brighter, not dimmer, just fixed. I eased off the gas again, thinking maybe the other car was stopped or driving painfully slow. But the lights didn't shift, didn't bob from uneven pavement, didn't widen or narrow the way headlights usually do. They just hovered in place. I kept expecting to see the outline of a vehicle emerge, even faintly. With that kind of brightness, I should have been able to see a silhouette or reflections on the fog, but the space around the lights stayed dark. No hood, no grill, nothing. After another half mile, a knot formed in my stomach. Something didn't line up. I checked my speedometer. I was barely going 30. The lights still didn't move. I flicked my high beams off and on again. No reaction. Usually when two cars approach each other on foggy mountain roads, at least one driver dims their lights, but nothing changed. For a second, I wondered if I'd zoned out and the lights were farther away than I thought. I blinked hard, leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter. The fog swirled, but the lights stayed centered. Same distance, same brightness, like they were watching me more than approaching me. I rolled down the window a few inches to listen. The cold air hit me immediately. I expected to hear an engine, even faintly, but the road ahead was silent, just the hum of my own tires and the soft hiss of fog brushing past. My heart started beating faster. I don't get scared easily, but there was something wrong with the way those lights hovered. I couldn't shake the feeling they weren't headlights, not in any normal sense. The fog began to thin as I descended into the next dip in the road. Slowly at first, then all at once, like a curtain pulling back. Patches of clear night opened on either side, stars visible through breaks in the mist. But the headlights, they were gone. Not faded, not veered off. Gone in the space of a second. The fog had parted like someone sweeping an arm across it, and the stretch of highway ahead was completely empty. No car, no taillights, no turnoffs where a vehicle could have pulled over. Just an open lane glistening faintly with moisture. I coasted a few more yards before I realized I'd been holding my breath. I slowed to a crawl and scanned both shoulders with my beams. If a car had turned off or gone down a ditch, I would have seen something. But the ground on either side sloped gently into wet grass and tall ferns. No tire impressions, no broken plants, not even tracks from an animal. Just silence. The fog behind me thickened again, creeping up the hill like nothing had happened. Ahead, the air was clear for the first time in miles. I was about to accelerate when something flickered in my rearview mirror. 2 faint points of light. Far behind me, just barely visible through the fog. I froze. The lights didn't bounce or sway. They didn't brighten or dim with the road. They held steady, perfectly steady like they had before. I turned my head to look back through the rear window. Nothing. No lights. No glow. When I glanced back at the mirror, the glass showed nothing but darkness. I felt the hairs rise on my arms. I accelerated gently, not wanting to slam the gas and lose control. My car climbed the next hill, engine humming normally, everything inside seeming almost too normal after what I'd just seen. As I reached the crest, the fog shifted again, curling across the road. My headlights swept through it, and for a split second I saw a shape. Not a car, not anything solid, more like a distortion, an area of air that bent the light wrong, as if something large but invisible had drifted across my path. It vanished before I could process it. The fog swallowed the spot whole. I didn't slow down again. I focused on the lines of the road, the edges of the guardrails, the sound of my own breathing trying to settle itself. Every now and then I checked the mirror, half expecting those impossible headlights to be there again. But the fog behind me stayed dark. A few miles later, I reached a clearer stretch where the sky opened up completely. It was almost jarring how ordinary everything looked, like I'd passed through a doorway without noticing. The trees glistened with leftover rain. The road smelled like wet pavement. The world looked normal. Except my dashboard clock was wrong. It had jumped ahead almost 9 minutes. My phone's clock stayed the same, but the car insisted I'd been driving longer than I knew I had. I reset the time manually, but a few seconds after I did, the minute digit flickered once before holding steady. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway with the engine still running. The fog hadn't followed me into town. The sky above my house was clear, but I kept thinking about the way those headlights never approached. How they hung in place, almost waiting. How they vanished at the exact moment the fog parted. How they reappeared behind me for a moment like they hadn't moved at all, but had only changed where they were looking from. I turned off the engine and listened. No fog, no headlights, just my porch light shining the way it always did. Still, I walked to my front door faster than usual, glancing at the road one more time before stepping inside, just in case the lights were still out there. I was out behind my apartment building when it happened, in the empty field that borders the drainage canal. It was late September, cool but not cold yet, and the sky was clearer than it had been in weeks. I'd stepped outside, mostly to get away from the humming fridge in my kitchen. It had been making this weird rattling sound all evening, and it was driving me nuts. I didn't have any real reason to be out there at midnight, but I couldn't sleep, so I walked around behind the building and stood in the open grass for a while. The field wasn't anything special, just waist-high weeds and a few scattered cottonwoods along the canal. The nearest streetlight was blown out, so it was almost pitch black. I could see a few stars above me, though, enough to feel like the sky had finally opened up after a week of clouds. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 12:08 a.m. I remember that exactly because I planned to head back inside by 12:15. I'd been trying to fix my sleep schedule and didn't want to stay up too late again. When I lowered the phone, something caught my eye. Just a tiny point of light moving above me. It was small, dim, almost like a star, but it wasn't steady. It drifted in a slow circle overhead, smooth enough that I figured it had to be a plane or satellite. But satellites don't circle like that, and planes have blinking lights. This one didn't blink at all. I watched it for a minute, trying to make sense of the pattern. It didn't wobble or shift. It just kept tracing the same small loop. I even wondered if it was a drone, but there was no sound, not even the faint buzz you'd expect. The air was still, completely still. I decided to check the compass app on my phone for no real reason beyond curiosity. I'd used it before in that same spot, and it usually worked fine. When I opened it, the needle spun in a full circle. Not fast, but steady, like it was being guided by some slow pulse. Then it reversed direction and spun the other way. I stood perfectly still, arms steady, feet planted. The compass didn't settle. It just kept rotating and rotating, smooth as the point of light above me. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" out loud, even though no one could hear me. I tried walking a few steps forward, thinking maybe I was standing over some metal pipe or something in the ground, but the needle sped up as I moved. I stopped and it slowed again, though it kept turning. I lifted the phone up near my face, same result. The needle glided around the dial like it wasn't tracking north at all, like north didn't exist in that moment. I looked back up at the sky. The light had moved, still circling, but lower. Not by much, just enough that I noticed I didn't have to tilt my head back as far to see it. It made my chest tighten for reasons I didn't fully understand. I stood there staring, phone in hand, feeling this weird heaviness settle around me. Not dangerous exactly, but unnatural. Like the field had somehow gone silent in a way silence shouldn't feel. I realized I couldn't hear the canal, which normally gurgled softly at night. Couldn't hear cars on the distant road either. Couldn't hear wind, just my own breathing. I waved my hand above my head like an idiot, trying to see if the light reacted. It didn't. Not at first, but when I started walking backward toward the building, the light shifted in a way that made my stomach drop. It didn't follow me. It just stopped circling. It held still, perfectly still, a single point in the sky, locked in place, as if watching me leave. My phone compass froze at the same time. 1 second it was spinning, and the next, it jolted to a stop, pointing somewhere southwest, wrong direction for north. It flickered, twitched slightly, then stayed fixed. I wanted to call someone. I wanted to film it. But I had this stupid, overwhelming feeling that if I tried to take a picture, something worse would happen. Like acknowledging it too directly would make it notice me in a way it hadn't yet. I don't know why I felt that. It wasn't logical. It just came over me so strong that the phone might as well have weighed 50 pounds in my hand. I backed up another step, then another. The point of light didn't move. Not an inch. I turned around, intending to walk normally back to the building, but something made me check over my shoulder one more time. It had dropped again. Lower. Maybe 10, 20 feet from where it had been. Still high in the sky, but definitely closer than before. My legs went warm and shaky. I fought the urge to run because running in pitch darkness across uneven ground seemed like a great way to break an ankle, but every instinct I had told me to get inside. I forced myself to walk, steady and controlled, even though it felt like walking through syrup. I could feel the urge to check the compass again, but I refused. I kept my eyes forward and moved until I reached the edge of the grass. When I stepped onto the gravel path beside the building, I finally risked looking up again. The point of light slid sideways, slow, effortless, as if it had been waiting for me to look. Not toward me, not away. Just a smooth drift that didn't match any plane or satellite I'd ever seen. The compass in my hand trembled, needle vibrating even though my phone wasn't moving. I whispered, "Okay, I'm done," and walked inside. When I reached my apartment door and stepped into the hallway glow, I checked the compass again. It stabilized instantly, pointing true north, like nothing had happened. I went straight to the window in my living room and pulled back the blinds. The sky was empty. No circling light, no drifting point, just stars and the faint glow from the town a few miles away. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide whether what I'd seen had been some kind of drone, some weird atmospheric reflection, or something else I didn't have a name for. But every time I replayed the moment in my head, the compass spinning smoothly, the silence that pressed in on everything, the way the light paused when I moved, I felt that same heaviness settle in my chest. Eventually, I shut the blinds and sat on the couch, phone in my hands. The compass worked fine for the rest of the night. It's worked fine ever since. But whenever I think about going back out to that field after midnight, I remember the slow circle of that light overhead, dropping closer in absolute silence, and the way the world seemed to hold its breath around me. I haven't stood out there in the dark since. I woke up sitting halfway upright, like someone had called me out of a dream. My room was dark except for the weak glow from the charger block under the nightstand. I didn't know what time it was, and for a few seconds I just sat there trying to decide if I had actually heard something or if it was just a leftover sound from whatever I'd been dreaming about. Then I heard it again. Not loud, not even clear, just this soft, breathy whisper, like someone saying my name through cupped hands from outside the house. The kind of sound you're not sure you heard until your whole body reacts before your mind does. My chest tightened and I felt this weird coldness in my arms, the kind that only happens when something feels wrong without you knowing why. I live in a rental outside of Missoula, in one of those houses that used to be part of someone's farmland. The next nearest house is maybe a quarter mile down the road. Nobody walks around out there at night, not unless something's wrong. I checked the clock, 2:41 a.m. The whisper didn't come again, but that almost made it worse. My room was too quiet now. No wind, no insects outside, not even the usual hum from the old refrigerator in the hall. I got out of bed slowly and walked toward the window facing the front yard. I didn't see anything through the glass. No headlights, no shadows. I grabbed my phone to check the doorbell camera. The live feed wasn't loading at first, just a spinning circle. I figured my Wi-Fi had dropped again. When it finally loaded, all I saw was silence and the faint outline of the porch. But the history showed a motion alert from 2 minutes earlier. I tapped the notification. The video froze for a second, then played. Just 10 seconds of the porch, totally empty. No movement, no breeze. But around the 5th second, the whole image flashed white. Not bright, not like a flashlight or car beam, just a soft, quick glow, like the exposure on the camera bumped up all at once. Then back to darkness. I replayed it 6 times, same thing every time. No figure, no animal, nothing, just the flash. I stood there in my living room barefoot, phone in hand, trying to listen past the pounding in my ears. A part of me wanted to write it off as the sensor glitching or a bug flying too close to the camera. But something felt off. The whisper I thought I heard hadn't sounded like it came from the porch. It felt closer, almost under the window. I went to the front door anyway and put my eye up to the peephole. The yard was empty. My truck sat where I'd left it. The gravel driveway was still. The pine trees across the yard barely moved, but the air felt too still. Like everything outside was waiting for something. I checked the backyard camera next. No alerts, no movement. Just the dim yard with the half-collapsed shed at the back fence. The camera there always picked up raccoons or deer passing through. Tonight, nothing. I tried to go back to bed after that, but I couldn't settle. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like I couldn't shake the idea that something had been right up next to the house. Close enough to whisper, close enough to know my name. I lay there with the covers pulled to my chest, staring at the weak outline of my door. Every few minutes I checked the clock. 3:05, 3:17, 3:24. The longer I lay still, the more I noticed how wrong the silence felt. Usually, even at night, there was some background noise. A passing truck on the highway, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. But the whole world felt muted, like someone had pressed pause on everything outside the walls. Right around 3:30, my bedroom window made a tiny tapping sound. Not a knock, not anything loud, just 3 soft, almost delicate taps, spaced evenly apart. My heart practically stopped. I didn't move for maybe 30 seconds. Then I sat up slowly and reached for my phone again. The doorbell camera had triggered another motion alert. I opened the video, and there it was, the same flash of light, same soft brightening, like someone held a glowing object just out of frame. No shape, no shadow, just the air itself brightening for half a second, then fading back. I checked the live feed immediately after. Nothing. But while I was watching, the brightness around the edges of the image seemed slightly off. Almost like the camera was struggling to adjust to something faint, something the human eye wouldn't pick up. I went back to the window, pulled the curtain aside, just enough to peek through. My yard sat under a washed-out moon, everything looking faintly blue. Nothing moved. I waited there long enough for my eyes to start burning. Then something changed overhead. The moonlight dimmed for a moment, not from clouds. There weren't any clouds, the sky was totally clear, but something passed above the house, blocking the light for just a second. Not a shape I could describe, not a silhouette, more like a soft shift in the brightness, a barely noticeable ripple. If I hadn't been staring directly at it, I probably wouldn't have seen it at all. I stepped back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping sound didn't come again, but I stood there for several minutes, expecting it to. My hands felt cold even though the room wasn't. Eventually, I walked back to the living room and turned on a lamp. I didn't care if the room was too bright to sleep afterward. I just needed something to feel normal. The light didn't flicker. The house felt more grounded with it on. Still, I checked the porch camera one more time. There was a new alert, time-stamped 3:46. My stomach nodded as I hit play. The camera showed the same empty porch, but this time the flash was brighter. Not long, maybe a quarter second, but unmistakable. The motion light above the door actually clicked on after it happened, as if something had been there. The camera caught the light turning on, but not whatever triggered it. I replayed it again and again. My hand shook a little by the fourth time. Something was out there. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't describe it, but it wasn't an animal. It wasn't headlights. It wasn't anything normal. By the time the sun came up, I still hadn't gone back to bed. I just sat on the couch listening for any leftover signs of whatever that was. Morning finally broke with an ordinary pale pink glow across the windows. Birds started up. A truck rumbled down the distant road. Everything sounded normal again, like the night had been cut out of the timeline. Later that morning, I stepped outside and walked across the porch. Nothing looked disturbed, no footprints on the gravel, no marks on the doorframe, but the air still felt a little off, like static after touching a doorknob. I checked the camera one more time when I came back inside. All the recordings were still there. All the flashes, all the empty frames. I haven't heard my name since that night. But every time the porch camera alerts now, day or night, I feel this tightness in my chest before I open it, like I'm bracing for that soft, bright flash again. The one that shouldn't exist. The one that seems to happen just outside the edge of what I'm able to understand. And sometimes, even on clear days, I catch myself glancing up at the sky, checking if the light feels normal. I noticed the first porch light go out when I was halfway up Alder Street. It was a chilly March night, clear enough that you could see the thin clouds drifting over the neighborhood, but cold enough that I had my hands shoved into the pockets of my hoodie. I'd stayed late at my friend Mason's place watching some documentary he wanted me to see, and by the time I started heading home, it was close to 1 a.m. The streets in our neighborhood were always dead at that hour. Just rows of single-story houses, parked cars, and the occasional cat slipping between yards. The lights along Alder weren't fancy, just those small yellow porch bulbs people leave on so their front steps aren't pitch black. The first one, the house with the trimmed hedges and the busted mailbox, flickered once. I thought maybe the bulb was dying. Then it clicked off completely. I kept walking, not thinking much of it, until the next house's porch light flickered too. Then it went out. One house down, same thing. A flutter of dim yellow, then darkness. At first, I honestly thought it was some kind of neighborhood power dip, but if that were the case, the streetlights should have gone out too. They didn't. They stayed solid and steady, humming the way they always did. Only the porch lights, one after another, switched off as I approached. I slowed down without meaning to. The sound of my footsteps on the sidewalk suddenly felt loud, like the night had thickened around me. I looked behind me, checking if maybe some raccoon or stray dog was triggering motion sensors or something stupid like that, but the houses behind me stayed dark. Nothing was moving. When I turned forward again, the next light in line, 2 houses ahead, blinked and died. I stopped completely. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. The neighborhood was usually quiet, but this was a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful. Just empty. I stepped forward again, more slowly this time, watching the row of houses. As I moved, the lights kept going out exactly in sync with my pace, like I was tripping some invisible switch. But they were too far away for motion sensors, and I wasn't close enough to trigger anything. That was when something shifted overhead. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like the air above me thickened for a second. I looked up and saw the clouds sliding past the moon. Nothing unusual at first, just thin gray streaks moving like they always did. Then a darker shape drifted across them. No outline, no steady form, just a faint shadow that didn't match the cloud layer. It moved too smoothly, too deliberately. I stood there with my mouth slightly open, watching it glide from one side of the street to the other. It didn't resemble a plane or helicopter. It didn't blink or glow. It was just darker, a smudge against the sky with no sound at all. Then it paused, not visibly, just its movement stopped. The clouds kept drifting, but the shadow held perfectly still. That was enough for me to start walking again, this time a little faster. I didn't want to run yet, because running felt like it would make everything worse somehow, but I needed to get home. As I passed the house with the big elm tree, its porch light flickered violently for a full second before going out. Not a glitch, not a power issue. It felt timed. Another light blinked off, then another. They were dropping ahead of me like dominoes. I pulled out my phone to text Mason, but the screen didn't wake up. It stayed black. No matter how many times I tapped, swiped, or pressed the buttons, it didn't respond. The battery wasn't dead. I'd charged it before leaving. It was like the whole phone had just stopped being a phone. My chest tightened as I kept walking. I glanced up again, and the shadow in the clouds moved. Not across the sky this time, downward. Just a few feet, barely noticeable, but enough that it made my breath catch. It wasn't lowering fast like something falling. It was controlled, intentional. My heart started pounding so hard I heard it in my ears. I cut across the street to Pine Avenue, trying to break the weird pattern with the porch lights, but the first house I passed there flickered out too. Same slow blink, same soft click, same darkness afterward. I swear I could feel something overhead, some weight or pressure in the air. The kind of feeling you get when you know someone is looking at you, even if you can't see them. I walked faster, not quite running, but close. Halfway down Pine, the last street light on the block dimmed. Not fully off, just lowered as if someone had a dial. The dimming spread to the next light, then the next, rolling ahead of me like a wave stretching down the street. The sky went a shade darker. Not from clouds. The clouds actually thinned out enough for me to see more stars. The darkness felt more like something above me was blocking what little light the moon gave off. I finally broke into a jog. The house at the corner of Pine and Willow was mine. Brown siding, lopsided fence, motion light that never worked right. I could see it from halfway up the block, the faint glow of my living room TV flickering inside because I'd left it on for background noise. But the moment I stepped within a certain distance, maybe 30 feet, the porch bulb made a tiny buzzing sound and shut off. The whole front of my house went dark. That was the moment panic finally hit me. I sprinted the last stretch, almost tripping over the uneven concrete near my driveway. I didn't look up again. I didn't need to. The air pressed down on me like a heavy blanket, thick enough that it made my ears feel clogged. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and nearly dropped my keys trying to unlock it. My hands were shaking hard enough that I had to steady them against the siding. When the door finally swung open, warm air spilled out. I stepped inside and slammed it behind me, locking both deadbolts, even though I'd never used the second one before. The instant the door clicked shut, the TV audio faded back in, the refrigerator hum returned, and something outside made a soft popping sound, like a far-off spark. I stood there in the entryway, breathing hard, listening. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was normal, familiar. After a minute, I forced myself to peek out the small window near the door. All the porch lights on the street were on again. Every single one. No flickering, no delay, just steady yellow glows like nothing had happened. I stayed awake for hours, watching the windows, listening for anything unusual. Nothing happened. The neighborhood went back to being exactly what it always was. A quiet little grid of streets with identical houses and predictable nights. But every time I step outside after dark now, I catch myself looking up at the clouds, checking for anything moving the wrong way. Anything too smooth or too quiet. Anything that pauses when I pause. And sometimes, when I walk home late, I swear I still see the porch lights hesitate before staying lit. Just long enough to make me wonder if something is still up there, drifting above the neighborhood, waiting for the right moment to glide across the sky again. I was out on Lake Bracken before sunrise, the way I usually was on days I couldn't sleep. It was late August, the kind of morning where the air felt heavy but cool, and everything was coated in a thin layer of moisture. I'd taken my old aluminum boat out from the dock behind my cousin Shelby's cabin. She let me use it whenever I wanted, as long as I didn't leave tackle lying everywhere like I used to. It was probably a little after 5. The sky was still that deep, pre-dawn blue, the water flat enough to reflect the tree line almost perfectly. I'd cut the motor and was drifting toward one of the coves where bass like to hide. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. Even the loons were still. I remember adjusting the line on my rod when the horizon brightened, Fast enough that I noticed it happening, but slow enough that I could convince myself it was just the sun coming earlier than usual. Except the light felt wrong. It was too bright for how early it was, and it wasn't spreading sideways the way sunrise does. It was a band of pale orange-white that glowed in one place right above the far end of the lake. A concentrated strip of dawn that wasn't supposed to be there yet. I kept staring at it, waiting for the sky to lighten around it, but the glow stayed narrow. It wasn't reflecting off clouds. There weren't any clouds. It wasn't lightning either. It was steady, quiet, almost sharp-looking. The boat drifted while I watched. My rod sat untouched between my knees. Then, after maybe 20 seconds, the glow began to rise. Not fade, rise. It pulled upward like someone was lifting the edge of a spotlight off the horizon. The band of brightness stretched, thinned, and then lifted into the air, leaving the horizon dark again. The lake, the trees, everything returned to the dim blue of pre-dawn. I actually stood up in the boat without thinking, which made it rock more than I liked. I held onto the side and just watched as the glow, now more of an oval, drifted quietly upward. It didn't flicker or pulse, it just moved, smooth and unhurried. At some height, it paused. The reflection of it rippled faintly on the water, but only for a second. Then the oval dimmed from the bottom upward, like a curtain lowering, until it disappeared. I stayed standing for what felt like forever, trying to understand what I'd just seen. My mind kept offering explanations that even I didn't believe. Maybe a flare? But flares fall, they don't retract. Maybe some kind of searchlight from the ridge? But who turns on a light like that before dawn, and why would it move straight up? I finally sat down and picked up my rod just to have something familiar to hold. The air felt heavier now. Not cold, not warm. Just thicker, like it was pressing in on me. I decided I should head back, not because I felt in danger, but because I suddenly didn't want to be the only person on the lake. I reached for the small motor's pull cord. But before I could tug it, the water surface around my boat shivered. Not waves, not wind. Just a perfectly circular ripple that spread outward from a spot a few feet off my bow, like something had broken the surface without actually breaking it. I leaned forward, squinting. The spot where the ripple had started looked darker than the surrounding water, almost metallic if water could be metallic. It wasn't an object, though, more like a reflection that had no source. The ripple faded. The dark spot brightened to normal water again. My heartbeat started climbing into my throat. I pulled the cord on the motor, and thankfully, it coughed to life on the first try. The engine's noise felt almost comforting. As I turned the boat around, I noticed the loons had returned to calling, but their calls sounded odd. Shorter, more abrupt, like something had interrupted their normal rhythm, and they were trying to reset it. I kept glancing behind me at the horizon where the glow had started. Nothing. Just the silhouette of pines and the faint suggestion of the coming sunrise, the real one this time. About halfway back to the dock, the motor sputtered. Not enough to die, just enough to lose power for half a second before regaining it. I checked the gas tank. It was barely a quarter down. Nothing wrong with the line. No weeds caught in the prop. The boat drifted another 10 yards before something overhead made me look up. It wasn't a sound. More like a shift in brightness. So faint I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been already keyed up. A patch of sky directly above me had gone slightly paler than the surrounding blue, like someone had smudged it. It was the same shape, long and slightly curved, as the glow I'd seen on the horizon. I killed the motor without thinking. The lake fell silent again, too silent. Even the insects at the shoreline had stopped. I felt that thick pressure in my chest again, like the air was waiting. The pale patch didn't move at first. It just hovered. No outline, no beams, no sound. Then it began to rise higher, or maybe fade, it was hard to tell. It stretched upward, thinning out until it dissolved completely. The very second it vanished, the normal color of the sky returned. The insects resumed buzzing. A loon called, this time its usual long wail. Everything stitched itself back together as if nothing had happened. I didn't waste time after that. I started the motor again and pushed it harder than I needed to, riding the small wakes all the way back to the dock. I tied off the boat with shaking hands. When I reached the cabin steps, I realized the front window light had turned itself on. I hadn't left it on when I went out. I was sure of that. Inside, the clock on the stove read 5:42. I checked my phone. 5:36. Only a small difference, but I'd never seen the stove clock off by exactly 6 minutes before. It usually drifted by seconds, not minutes. I sat at the table and tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a weird coincidence of bad electronics and early morning fatigue. But when I looked out through the window at the lake, the water was still as glass, like the whole thing had frozen. The sun finally rose for real around 6:15. Normal light, normal warmth, normal shadows. But I kept thinking about how the false glow had pulled away, lifted instead of spread, and how the sky above me had matched it perfectly. I still fish at dawn sometimes, but I stay closer to shore now. And every time the horizon brightens even a little earlier than it should, I watch it carefully, waiting to see whether the light is coming from the sun or going someplace else entirely. I was lying on my back in the grass behind my cousin Leo's cabin, the way I always did when I visited him out near Canyon City. His place sat at the edge of a long stretch of scrubland where the nearest real light pollution was a half-hour drive away. Most nights, the stars looked so sharp they felt close enough to touch. I'd gotten into the habit of dragging out an old wool blanket and just watching the sky until my neck got stiff. That night was warm for early September, one of those evenings where the heat from the day stuck around longer than you expected. Leo had gone inside around 11, saying he had to work early. I stayed outside. It was a clear sky, not a single cloud. No moon either, so the stars were even brighter. I remember thinking it felt like the kind of night where nothing weird could happen, just peaceful. I must have been out there nearly an hour when I noticed a section of the sky looked wrong. Not darker, just empty, as if the stars in that patch had blinked out. At first I thought my eyes were unfocusing, or maybe I'd glanced at something bright. But when I stared right at it, the empty spot was still there. An oddly round shape, maybe the size of my outstretched hand from where I was lying, with no stars visible through it. I sat up a little, leaning on my elbows. The patch moved. It drifted slowly, the same direction the rest of the sky wasn't moving. Stars around it remained steady, but inside that shape there was nothing. Not a single point of light, like someone had cut a circle out of the night. I don't know how long I watched it. Maybe 20 seconds. Maybe a minute. I remember my mind scrambling for explanations. Bird flock? Plane? Smoke? None of those made sense. It was too big, too round, too smooth in the way it moved. The air felt heavy in my chest, like it did before thunderstorms, except the sky was totally clear. Then the stars came back. Not all at once. More like the patch dissolved, breaking apart at the edges until the missing constellations flickered into place again. It looked like the sky repairing itself. I stayed frozen for a long moment, waiting to see if anything else happened. My pulse felt too loud in my ears. I finally got myself to stand up and brush off my jeans. I wasn't sure if I should go inside and tell Leo, or if I should just pretend I hadn't seen anything. As I was deciding, a set of lights blinked on along the distant highway. Headlights, I figured. But they didn't behave like headlights. Instead of moving steadily along the road, they hovered. Two faint white dots, too far apart to be on the same car, stayed still above a stretch of land with no road at all. I squinted, thinking maybe it was a pair of drones or ATVs or something, but then the dots tilted. Not moved. Tilted, like they rotated in place. And then they blinked out completely. I told myself it was nothing. I went back to the blanket, sat down again, and tried to make everything normal by focusing on constellations I recognized. Orion, Cassiopeia, the usual stuff. My hands shook a little, but I figured if I just sat there long enough, I'd settle. Something made a soft humming sound behind me. It didn't sound like an engine or power line. It was lower, more even, almost like the vibration came from inside my chest instead of outside. The hair on my arms lifted instantly. I turned around, but the scrubland behind the cabin looked the same as always. Dark brush, the silhouette of the fence line, the faint outline of the hills. Nothing moved. The hum faded. The crickets resumed at the exact same moment. I hadn't realized they'd stopped. I stood again and looked toward the cabin. The porch light Leo had left on flickered once. Just once, but enough to make me walk toward it faster than I intended. The moment I stepped onto the gravel path, the humming sound started again. Farther away this time, more toward the field south of the cabin. I stopped walking. Something was shifting out there. Very faint, almost imperceptible, like a distortion in the dark. The air felt warm around my face, even though the night had gotten cooler. I listened hard, trying to separate normal nighttime sounds from whatever was making that vibration. Then something blocked the stars again. Not the same round shape as before. This one was elongated, drifting horizontally across the sky. It didn't glow. It didn't make any sound I could hear directly. But as it passed overhead, every insect noise died again, and my phone in my pocket buzzed like it was receiving a call. When I pulled it out, the screen was just bright white. No icons, no notifications. I watched the shape slide slowly toward the west. My breathing felt shallow, like my brain was trying to decide whether I should run or freeze. Eventually, the object thinned out, dissolving against the sky until the stars behind it came back one by one. When the last star reappeared, the crickets started again in perfect unison. My phone screen returned to normal. I didn't go back to the blanket. I walked straight into the cabin, closed the door quietly, and sat at the kitchen table until Leo woke up around 6. He asked why I was up so early, and I told him I just slept wrong and couldn't get back to bed. I didn't tell him about the stars or the humming or the lights near the foothills. I wasn't even sure how to put it into words. That night, after he left for work, I stepped outside again just to test myself. The sky looked normal, the fields looked normal, everything sounded normal. But I kept feeling this pressure behind my ribs, like the air had changed somehow. I still go out to visit Leo every couple months. I still stargaze sometimes, but part of me is always bracing, waiting to see whether the sky just empties again, whether something drifts overhead that shouldn't be there. Something big enough to erase stars without making a single sound. And every once in a while, when I'm out there alone, I'll stop and listen just to make sure I still hear the crickets. The voicemail came in while I was brushing my teeth. My phone was on the counter, screen lighting up with my own name. That caught my eye first. I remember leaning over the sink, foam still in my mouth, staring at it like it was a mistake that would correct itself if I waited long enough. I didn't answer it. I just let it ring out. When I wiped my mouth and picked the phone up, I saw the missed call and a new voicemail notification. Same number as mine. Same contact photo. Same everything. I stood there for a second, listening to the bathroom fan, trying to think of a normal explanation. Pocket dial didn't make sense. I hadn't touched the phone. It had been sitting face up the whole time. I hit play. At first, there was just background noise, faint like wind through a crack or a bad connection. Then a man cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said. He pronounced it right. Not Dan, not Danny. Daniel, the way my mother used to say it when she wanted my attention. "You're not going to want to hear this," he continued, calm and slow, like he was choosing each word carefully. "But you need to understand that attending the conference this weekend would be a mistake." I stopped breathing without realizing it. He went on. "You mentioned it in passing. That was enough. It doesn't matter that you didn't register yet. It doesn't matter that you didn't post about it." I felt cold then, all over, even though the heat was on. "You should stay home," he said. "If you don't, things will become complicated." There was a pause. I waited for him to keep talking. Instead, the message cut to silence. Then I heard breathing. Not loud, not distorted, just someone breathing slowly, close to the microphone. I counted 4 breaths before the voicemail ended. I checked the call details again. Same number, same phone. I stood in my bathroom for a long time after that, replaying it, trying to catch some glitch, some hint it was fake. There wasn't one. The audio was clean, no distortion except at the very start. I hadn't told anyone about the conference. Not in a text, not online. I'd only mentioned it once, out loud, 2 nights earlier when my friend Mark had stopped by. We'd been standing in my kitchen, drinking cheap beer, talking about nothing important. He'd mentioned he was heading out of town that weekend. I'd said, "Yeah, I was thinking about that UFO thing in Denver, but I'll probably skip it." That was it. No details, no date, no follow-up. After the voicemail, I called Mark. He didn't answer. I texted him. No response. I checked my call logs. There was no outgoing call to myself. Nothing weird. Just the missed call and the voicemail. I barely slept. The next morning, I took the day off work. I kept the phone on the table in front of me, face up like it might move on its own. Every little sound in the apartment made me look up. Pipes knocking. A car door outside. Someone walking in the hall. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't answer right away. I looked through the peephole. Two men stood there, close together. Both wore dark coats, even though it was snowing lightly, not cold enough to justify them. One was taller, thin, with a narrow face and hair that looked too carefully arranged. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a neutral expression that didn't shift when he noticed the peephole darken. I opened the door a crack, chain still on. "Daniel Harper?" the tall one asked. "Yes." "We're here to clarify a misunderstanding," he said. "What misunderstanding?" "The one involving your voicemail," the shorter one said, smiling faintly. My stomach dropped. "I didn't leave a voicemail." They both nodded, like that was expected. "May we come in?" the tall one asked. "No," I said. "You can talk from there." They didn't argue. The shorter one glanced past me into my apartment like he was checking something off a list. "You've been interested in anomalous aerial reports for a while," he said. "Casually, recreationally." "I read articles," I said. "That's not illegal." "No," the tall one agreed, "but context matters." I asked who they were. "Administrative," he said. "For who?" He smiled, just slightly. "For keeping things simple." I told them again I hadn't signed up for anything, that I wasn't planning to go anymore, that I didn't want trouble. "That's good," the shorter one said. "That's exactly what we wanted to hear." I asked how they'd left the voicemail. The tall one tilted his head. "We didn't leave anything. But you just said..." "The message was a courtesy," he said, "not an action." "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't need to," the shorter one said. "It just needs to work." Snow was collecting on their shoulders. Neither of them brushed it off. "Did you listen to the entire message?" the tall one asked. "Yes." "And the end?" he pressed. "I heard breathing." They exchanged a look. Quick. Tight. "That part wasn't intended for you," the shorter one said. "Then why was it there?" He smiled again. "Technical overlap. I wanted to slam the door. Instead, I asked how the call came from my own number." The tall one leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Phones reuse pathways. Sometimes they loop." "That's not how." "You won't receive another message," he said, "as long as you don't put yourself in the wrong place." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. They both relaxed just a bit. "Good," the shorter one said. "Then this stays uncomplicated." They stepped back from the door together. As they turned to leave, I noticed something off about their footsteps. Not the sound, the timing. Like they were a fraction of a second out of sync with their movement. I closed the door and locked it. Stood there listening. I didn't hear them go down the hall. I didn't hear the building's front door open. I checked the peephole again. The hallway was empty. That night, I powered my phone off and left it on the kitchen counter. I didn't trust it near my bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up anyway. No sound had woken me. I just opened my eyes. From the kitchen, I heard quiet breathing. I stayed very still until morning. They asked me to look at the drawing before they said why they were there. It was mid-morning, cold but clear, the kind of winter day where the light feels thin. I'd just come back from checking the fence line behind my place when I saw the car parked by the mailbox. Black sedan, engine off. No one inside. That wasn't unusual by itself, but it had been backed in perfectly. Tires aligned with the edge of the gravel like someone had measured it. I was still standing there when the two men stepped out from behind it. I didn't hear doors open. 1 second the car was empty, the next they were there. Coats buttoned, hands relaxed at their sides. "Mr. Keene," the taller one said, "thank you for taking the time." I didn't agree to anything, I said. He smiled like that was fine. "We won't take much." They didn't ask to come inside. They just stood there in the driveway, cold air fogging my breath while theirs stayed clear. The shorter man held out a folder, not toward me yet, just visible enough that I could see the edge of a sheet of paper inside. "We're following up on an incident," he said, "from several years ago." I already knew which one. I'd been trying not to think about it for years, not because it was traumatic or dramatic, but because it was slippery. Every time I went back to it, pieces felt thinner, like they'd been rubbed smooth. "I already talked to someone back then," I said. "Yes," the taller man said. "We have that record." That made my stomach tighten. The shorter man finally held the folder out to me. "We'd like you to look at something." I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a sketch, pencil on white paper, careful lines shaded lightly. Not a kid's drawing, not something rushed. It showed a shape hovering above a ridgeline, long and flattened, wider than it was tall. No wings, no markings, just form. My throat went dry. "I didn't draw this," I said. "No," the taller man said. "You described it." I stared at the sketch longer than I should have. It felt familiar in the same way a word does when it's on the tip of your tongue. Not wrong, just incomplete. "That looks like," I started. "Yes," the shorter man said. I shook my head. "I don't know. I can't tell." They both watched my face closely, not my eyes, like they were waiting for something specific to happen. "This is what you reported seeing," the taller one said. "Late fall, mountain trail, snow starting to come down." I remembered that much. Hiking back toward the car later than I'd planned, the sky going that deep blue-gray that comes right before a storm, feeling watched without knowing why. "You said it was silent," the shorter man added. "Low. Close enough that you thought you could hit it with a rock." I swallowed. "I might have said that." "You were very clear at the time," the taller man said. I looked back at the drawing. The longer I stared, the less certain I felt. "I don't remember details," I said. "It's been a long time." "How did it move?" the shorter man asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. "I don't know." "Did it rotate?" "I don't know." "Did it cast a shadow?" "I don't remember." The taller man's smile faded slightly. "Try," he said, not unkindly. "This matters." I felt a flash of irritation. "It mattered then. Nobody cared. You asked your questions, wrote things down, and left." "That's true," he said. "And we apologize for the delay." "For what?" He didn't answer. I handed the folder back. "I can't help you. Whatever I saw, it's gone." The shorter man took the folder, but didn't close it. He studied the drawing himself, like he was comparing it to something internal. "That's not supposed to fade," he said quietly. The taller man glanced at him. He looked up at me again. "Memory degrades, yes, but not like this." "I'm not lying," I said. "We don't think you are," the taller man said. "That's the problem." A wind moved through the trees behind the house, stirring snow off the branches. For a second, the sound pulled at something in my head. A sense of scale, of being very small. "Can you tell us anything else?" the shorter man asked. "Even a feeling." I closed my eyes. For a moment there was pressure, not pain, just awareness, like standing too close to a speaker. Then it slipped away. "I felt like it was waiting," I said finally. "Not for me, just waiting." They both nodded. "That matches," the taller man said. I opened my eyes. "Matches what?" He closed the folder. "Earlier accounts." They thanked me then, polite, sincere, like I'd helped more than I realized. Before they left, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest the whole time. "Why come back now?" The taller man paused. "Because time passed," he said. The shorter man added, "And because some things shouldn't be forgotten this easily." They walked back to the car. Again, I didn't hear the doors. The sedan rolled away without throwing gravel. I stood in the driveway long after they were gone. That night, I dreamed of the trail. The snow, the way the trees had gone quiet all at once. When I woke up, there was a shape in my head I couldn't quite hold on to, like a shadow behind my eyes. It faded before I could look at it too closely. I was stargazing behind my cousin Jonah's cabin the night it happened. He lived out in the hills near Pinedale, Wyoming, where the sky actually looked the way it does in planetarium posters. Huge, sharp, crowded with stars you never see in town. He'd invited a few of us up for the weekend because the Perseid meteor shower was supposed to peak, and he wanted company. I drove up late after work, figuring I'd miss most of the show, but still get a quiet night out of it. By the time I got there, it was close to 11. Jonah and his girlfriend Ariana were already out in the field with blankets and a little speaker playing something low and calm. The weather was clearer than the forecast said it would be, cold but not biting, with the faintest breeze coming down from the ridge. The field behind the cabin sloped gently upward, giving you a wide stretch of open sky. We all lay there on our backs, and I pointing out satellites and the occasional streak of a meteor. It started when I noticed a cluster of stars near Cassiopeia that looked a little off, not brighter or dimmer, just positioned strangely, like one had slipped slightly out of place. I blinked a few times. The stars around it stayed fixed, the constellations perfectly normal, but that one star was drifting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, sliding sideways along a path that didn't match anything I knew. Not a satellite arc, not a plane, not a shooting star. It looked like a star being nudged on a track, I propped myself onto my elbows, trying to follow its movement. The longer I watched, the more certain I was. This thing was moving. Maybe an inch at a time if you held up a hand to measure. "Hey," I said quietly, not wanting to sound weird. "Does that star look like it's moving to you?" Jonah didn't answer at first. He was half asleep on his blanket. Ariana turned her head and squinted up at the sky. "Which one?" I pointed directly at it. The star froze. It stopped so abruptly I thought my eyes had tricked me. It sat perfectly still, indistinguishable from every other point of light. The moment Ariana followed my finger, there was no movement. Nothing strange, just a normal sky. I let my hand fall. "Never mind. I think I'm just tired." Ariana shrugged and lay back down. Jonah mumbled something about grabbing another beer and wandered inside. I stayed upright, watching that same patch of sky. And after about 10 seconds, the star started moving again. A fraction at a time. A patient, deliberate glide, like it wasn't trying to hide so much as avoid being seen in motion. My mouth went dry. I waited another minute to be sure, then called out again, "Ariana, look, now it's moving." She sat up with a sigh. "Which one? You gotta show me." I pointed. And again, instant stillness. No drifting, no sliding, no movement at all. A strange pressure settled into my chest, something like embarrassment mixed with a creeping sense that the timing wasn't a coincidence. The moment someone else looked, it stopped. I tried a third time. I waited until Jonah came back out with beers, gave it another 15 seconds until the star was unmistakably drifting again, then said, "You guys gotta see this. That one's shifting." Both of them looked up. I pointed. "Frozen." Jonah stared for a second, shrugged, and handed me a beer. "Man, you're just tired. Stars don't move sideways." I forced a laugh, but couldn't stop watching. When they went back to their conversation, the drifting resumed. Only this time, the star shifted downward, a subtle diagonal slide. Not fast, just steady, like something testing boundaries. Ariana eventually headed inside to make tea, and Jonah went with her, leaving me alone in the field. I lay back down and fixed my eyes on the drifting star. I didn't blink for long stretches because every time I did, I feared I'd miss something. The movement grew slightly more noticeable. Still subtle, but steady enough that if I focused on another star beside it, I could track the difference. The drifting star crossed a gap between two faint stars and kept going. The space behind it didn't change. No afterglow, no streak, no trail. Just quiet, patient movement. I whispered, "What are you doing?" I hadn't meant to say anything out loud. The words slipped out because the silence was thick and the night felt like it was waiting for something from me. The star dimmed. Not by much, just a small pulse like a dying flashlight bulb. Then it brightened again, gradually returning to its normal intensity. I sat up. "Okay," I murmured. "That's not normal." And then, this part is what stuck with me more than the movement. The drifting star paused for the first time without me pointing at it. It hung there, faintly brighter than before. A prickling sensation spread across my arms. I felt exposed out there in the open, even though logically nothing around me had changed. The breeze had stopped. The cold felt sharper. And then the star resumed drifting, but now in a direction that made even less sense. Upward, against the natural arc of the sky, not rising like the rest of the stars, just climbing. A tiny climb, a careful shift. I stood up. When I broke eye contact for just 1 second, just long enough to brush dirt from my jeans, the star brightened again. A flash, brief but sharp. I froze. My heart felt lodged up in my throat. "Jonah!" I shouted. He slid open the back door and squinted at me. "What?" "Just come out here, please." He sighed but stepped onto the porch. "What now?" I pointed at the sky without speaking. The star locked into place instantly. Jonah stared. "Which one am I?" And before he finished the sentence, the star went dimmer, just slightly, like a fading bulb. He frowned. "That one? It's just twinkling." "No," I said, "it's been moving, sliding." "Stars don't slide," he said gently. I lowered my hand and stared again. The star remained perfectly still, but I felt watched, not stared at emotionally, more like someone calculating distance, measuring, waiting. Jonah gave me a weird look, but eventually went back inside, murmuring something about me needing sleep. I stayed alone in the field. When I looked back up, the star didn't drift right away. It waited. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Then it slid again, but this time much faster. Not fast enough to streak, but fast enough that I muttered, "Holy shit," under my breath when I saw it cross a visible distance. It moved toward another cluster of stars, then stopped dead. Then the sky brightened, not a flash, not a beam, just a brief thinning of the darkness in a small circle around that point. And everything in me screamed that something was about to happen. I stepped backward, my boots crunching in the dry grass. The drifting star pulsed faintly a third time. Then it faded. Not out of sight, out of existence, like something had turned off a light behind a tiny pinhole. The sky where it had been looked too empty, like there should have been a star there, but there wasn't. I waited for it to reappear. It didn't. 10 seconds. Nothing. 30. Nothing. A full minute. Nothing. When I finally tore my eyes away, I walked backward all the way to the cabin, unable to shake the feeling that if I looked up again too quickly, I would see the star above me instead of where it had been. Inside, I tried to explain it to Jonah and Ariana. Neither of them had seen anything unusual. They brushed it off as eye strain. Maybe one of those floaters you get when you stare too long at something bright. I didn't argue. It wouldn't have mattered. When we all went to bed, I lay awake for hours, staring out the small window near the bunk beds. Most of the stars looked normal, but every now and then when my eyes drifted away from a particular spot, I thought I saw a faint glimmer of movement in the corner of my vision, like something shifting just out of sight. And each time I looked straight at it, it stopped. The power went out around 9:20 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had been microwaving leftover stew in my place outside Wadsworth, Nevada, and the microwave stopped mid-rotation with a hard click. The whole house went dark at once. No flicker, no ramping down, just immediate black. I figured a transformer blew somewhere. It wasn't unusual out there. My house sat on a dirt road with maybe 6 others scattered across a stretch of scrubland, the kind of place where outages were just part of life. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, saw the battery was only at 18%, and set it down so I wouldn't drain it. My first instinct was to check outside, see if the neighbors' houses were dark too. The night was quiet when I stepped onto the porch. No wind, no insects, no distant highway hum. Even the usual barking from the McLean's dog 2 lots over wasn't happening. Just stillness. Then the sky changed. It didn't brighten or flash, it shifted. In less than a second, the entire sky turned a flat, dull gray. Not storm gray, not clouds. It looked metallic somehow, like brushed steel stretched across the whole horizon. No shine, no texture, just a uniform muted gray shape covering everything. I stared up, confused. The weather had been perfectly clear earlier. I'd watched a bright, normal sunset maybe an hour before. There hadn't been a single cloud. Now the sky looked like it had been painted over, and it wasn't just overhead, it was everywhere. Horizon to horizon, as if the real sky had been swapped out. The silence made it worse. There was no thunder, no wind rushing in with a sudden front, no crackling power lines, just that metallic sky sitting there, too smooth, too even. After maybe 3 seconds, it's hard to judge, the gray deepened slightly. Not darker exactly, but richer, like a second layer had been added. I felt a pressure shift then, a faint pop in my left ear, the kind you get when altitude changes. I whispered, "What the hell?" The sound of my voice felt swallowed, as though it couldn't travel far. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the metallic sky faded. The gray thinned like diluted paint until it dissolved completely, revealing clear, star-filled darkness. No clouds, no sign anything had happened. The silence remained. I stood there for a minute, waiting for something. Wind, insects, a plane overhead, anything. But the world stayed unnaturally still. My phone buzzed unexpectedly behind me, vibrating on the counter through the open door. I went inside. The screen was lit, but instead of a notification, it showed the time as 2:11 a.m. I blinked at it. That wasn't possible. I checked the wall clock out of instinct. It was dead, of course, with the power still out. I looked at my phone again. 2:11 a.m. Battery at 17%. The house looked exactly as it had minutes before. Microwave door still open, everything frozen in the same positions. Yet 4 hours had supposedly passed. I stepped back onto the porch. The stars were still bright. The silence finally broke. A single gust of wind pushing across the yard, stirring the sagebrush. I listened hard. Crickets started up a few beats later. A dog barked somewhere far off. The world was rebooting. I walked a few paces into the yard and looked up again, half expecting the sky to shift back to that metallic blanket. It didn't, but something felt off in the air. The cold had a strange sharpness, like it hadn't settled naturally. I noticed something else too. The fence post near the west side of my yard was warm. Not hot, warm like someone had cupped their hand around it moments earlier. The wood around it was cold with the night air except for a single patch the size of a dinner plate. I held my palm over it. The warmth radiated faintly, still dissipating. I checked the other posts. All cold. I didn't know what to do with that information, so I just stood there, arms crossed against the chill, staring at the stars and trying to shake off the disorientation. My phone still insisted it was after 2 a.m. Maybe the outage messed with it, I told myself. Maybe the internal clock jumped. Back inside, I lit a candle and sat on the couch. The house felt wrong, like I'd come back to it after being gone longer than I remembered. The air was thick and slightly humid, though Nevada nights were bone dry. Even the quiet tick of the cooling microwave sounded delayed. Around 2:30, the power surged back. Lights blinked on. The fridge kicked in. The microwave restarted its cycle for half a second before beeping angrily. I stood up too fast. Something about the lights returning made my stomach twist. I checked the thermostat. It had reset to factory settings. The oven clock blinked 12. The TV was on the wrong input. Things that usually held memory through an outage had all reset. I picked up my phone, expecting the power returning to sync the clock. It didn't. Still 2:14 a.m. I sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees, trying to retrace everything. The stew, the microwave stopping, walking outside, the metallic sky, the silence, the return to normal. There was no gap where 4 hours could fit. My beard stubble wasn't longer. The candle I'd lit wasn't melted down. Even my water bottle was still cold. Just the time. And the warm patch on the fence. I finally forced myself to go to bed around 3, though I left the hallway light on. I expected to dream about the sky. Instead, I didn't dream at all. When I woke, sunlight filled the room and everything looked painfully normal. For a second, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I stepped outside. The fence post was still there, but the wood in that warm patch looked slightly different. Darker, smoother, almost polished. Like the surface had been pressed or heated enough to change its texture. I ran my fingers over it. The shape was subtle but definitely there, slightly oval. I walked the entire yard after that, checking for footprints, scorch marks, anything. Nothing else stood out. The power company left a voicemail later saying the outage affected only a very small area, just 2 streets. A failed line sensor, they said, though they didn't usually fail in completely clear weather. That night, around the same time, I stepped outside again. No outage, no metallic sky, just stars and cold wind. But something in the air still felt watchful. Not threatening, just aware. 4 days later, my phone randomly displayed the time as 9:20 p.m. Again for a split second, even though it was mid-afternoon. It corrected itself immediately. No other glitches. I still live in the same house. I still use the same microwave. But whenever the power flickers, even for a fraction of a second, I find myself glancing at the sky, terrified of seeing it flatten into that dull metallic sheet again, silent and unnatural, covering everything without a single reason why. And sometimes late at night, the air near that same fence post feels warm again. I was driving back from Thompson Falls late on a Sunday night, taking the long stretch of Highway 200 that follows the river. It was cold enough for frost to form on the edges of the windshield, but not quite snowing. One of those dry Montana nights where everything feels sharper and quieter than usual. I'd stayed too long at a friend's place, lost track of time, and now I had an hour's drive home in near total darkness. The only other car I'd seen in 20 minutes was a logging truck heading the opposite direction. After that, it was just me, the hum of my old Subaru, and the pale yellow beam of the headlights cutting through the dark. I remember adjusting the heater and glancing down for just a second. When I looked back up, the headlights reflected off something in midair. A sharp flash, clean, metallic, unmistakably reflective, right above the road and maybe 30 feet ahead. High enough that it wasn't on the ground, but low enough that if it had been a sign, I would have known the stretch. I slowed down immediately, leaning forward over the wheel. My first thought was that maybe it was a piece of equipment hanging from a power line. But the power lines along that road run farther inland, not directly overhead. I rolled down the window a few inches, listening. Nothing. No engine noise except mine. No wind. The river on my right sounded quieter than usual, almost muted. Even the tires on the asphalt seemed too soft, like the road was absorbing the sound. I eased the car to the shoulder and stopped completely. My hands were tight on the wheel without me realizing it. I looked up toward the spot where the reflection had come from. Nothing there. Just empty air and a perfectly normal dark sky. No sign, no wire, no bird. Nothing that could have thrown back such a bright, clean flash. I turned off the headlights to see better. That was a mistake. The darkness closed in so fast it felt physical. A heavy, absolute black that swallowed the road and the trees. I switched them back on immediately, heart skipping. As the light flooded the road again, I saw something drift across the beam. Not an object, more like a distortion. The kind of shimmer you see above asphalt on a hot day. But this was winter, late at night, and it passed horizontally across the beam like a soft ripple in the air. I held my breath. The shimmer slowed, then stopped directly in front of the car. For a moment, the headlights looked slightly dimmer, like they were being absorbed by whatever I was looking at. Then the distortion collapsed inward, almost like it folded into itself. The headlights brightened again, and everything looked normal. I stayed parked for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing. The cold coming through the cracked window felt oddly warm in the chest, like my own body couldn't figure out how to regulate my reaction. I was about to pull back onto the road when I heard a faint clicking sound. It came from the direction of the trees across the road. Slow, inconsistent clicks, like someone tapping metal lightly against metal. They weren't rhythmic, but they also weren't random. It reminded me of someone trying out unfamiliar tools. I shut the window. The clicking got quieter but didn't stop. I turned on the high beams, pointing them toward the tree line. Nothing, just pines and bare branches. But the clicking stopped the moment the high beams hit. I shifted in my seat, put the car in drive, and eased forward. For the first 100 yards, nothing happened. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone or something step into the road behind me. The headlights illuminated the asphalt in a long, bright stretch, uninterrupted. Then the reflection flashed again, this time off to the left. Not as bright, but unmistakably metallic. I slowed down again, but didn't stop. My pulse was hammering too hard. As I coasted past the spot where the flash had been, the radio crackled. I didn't even realize the radio was on. It had been silent for the whole drive. But it crackled sharply twice and then went dead again. Not static, not music, just two bursts of white noise. The dashboard lights dimmed for half a second. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. "Come on," I whispered to the car, or maybe to myself. "Just keep going." The rest of the road ahead looked clear. Nothing unusual, nothing metallic, but the air felt off. Heavier, denser, like I'd driven into a pocket where the atmosphere wasn't behaving right. I rolled the window down again, only an inch, just enough to hear the world. The river should have been loud, running full and cold this time of year. Instead, it sounded like it was farther away than it really was, like the road had pulled back from it. The clicking returned. This time, closer, much closer, off to my right, not in the trees now, near the guardrail. Metal on metal, slow taps, almost curious. Instinct took over. I accelerated. Not dangerously, but quickly, like getting distance was the only thing that mattered. The clicking faded behind me, swallowed by normal road noise. The air pressure in the cabin eased, and my ears cleared as though I'd been descending a hill, even though the elevation was flat. After another mile, the headlights reflected off a normal road sign. That shouldn't have reassured me as much as it did, but it did. I finally exhaled. I kept driving, checking the mirrors constantly, waiting for the reflection to reappear or the radio to crackle again. But the road stayed empty, boring, familiar. The sky stayed black. The river sounded normal again. By the time the first lights of Noxon appeared in the distance, I'd convinced myself to keep going all the way home rather than pulling over. My hands didn't fully stop shaking until I was parked in my driveway. Inside, I sat down on the floor by the bed, not sure why, and tried to slow my breathing. Then my phone buzzed. A notification I'd never seen before. Motion detected ahead, 11:42 p.m. My phone didn't have any motion detection apps installed. It didn't have anything that should have triggered that kind of alert. I checked the timestamp, 11:42 p.m., Exactly the minute I'd seen the first flash hanging in the air, the alert disappeared as quickly as it came, like it had never been real. When I tried to tap it, it was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. For days afterward, every reflective surface, not just metal, but glass, puddles, anything, made me stiffen. I kept expecting to see something hanging in the air, waiting to reflect the light back at me. It hasn't happened again. But now, every time I drive that stretch of Highway 200, I grip the wheel a little tighter as I round the bends, watching the air just above the road for something metallic, waiting for the light to catch on it again. I was out in McKenzie County, North Dakota, early October, near where my cousin's property borders the edge of the national grasslands. Real flat, big sky. He'd invited me up for the weekend to help install a windbreak fence, and I'd taken Friday off work to drive out. It's not a place with much going on at night. Nearest neighbor's a couple miles, maybe more. So you either drink, watch firewood burn, or look at the stars. That Friday night was clear, colder than I expected, probably in the 40s. You could see the Milky Way without even trying. We'd finished dinner around 8:30, and my cousin Travis had gone inside to put his kids to bed. I wasn't tired, so I grabbed a blanket and set up a reclining camp chair behind the barn, away from the porch light. I had an app on my phone that could tell you what you were looking at, but I left it off. I liked not knowing exactly. I don't know how long I'd been out there before it happened. Maybe 45 minutes? I wasn't even fully paying attention, just scanning and relaxing, when I noticed one of the stars was moving. I've seen satellites before. I've also seen planes at high altitude with their lights barely visible. This wasn't either of those. For one, it wasn't bright like a plane. It was exactly the same as a star, tiny and steady, but it started sliding across the sky in a straight line, not arcing like the ISS or fading like a meteor. It moved maybe 10-15 degrees across the sky, heading west to east. Then it just stopped, abruptly. No slowing down, no flicker. It just halted mid-sky. I sat up in the chair and kept my eyes fixed on it, waiting for it to either resume or disappear. It didn't do either for a while. It just hovered, still looking like any other star, except now I couldn't ignore that it had moved. I reached for my phone, but stopped. I had this weird thought that I'd miss something if I looked away, even for a second. After maybe 30 seconds of being perfectly still, the star began to dim, not like something flying away or disappearing behind clouds. Just a slow, steady fade out until it was gone. I sat there for a while longer. Didn't see anything else unusual, though I kept checking the same area it had disappeared from. No noise, no wind, just cold air and bugs buzzing somewhere far off. I told Travis about it the next morning. He shrugged and said maybe it was a drone, but we both knew that didn't track. Too high, too small, and absolutely silent. And who's flying drones out there at 10 p.m. miles from anything? I let it go. Kind of forgot about it, honestly. Then something else happened the next night. Saturday night, same deal. Travis and his wife had gone to bed. I was outside again, back in the chair. Different part of the sky this time, more toward the northeast. Around the same time, I spotted a faint movement, same kind of light, but this one was zigzagging. Just barely, but definitely not a straight line. It wasn't fast, but the direction kept shifting. Left, right, pause, up a little, then down. It didn't fade like the last one. It blinked out, just gone between 1 second and the next. And again, no noise. I stood up that time and walked toward the field a bit, just to get away from the barn. I felt this weird prickling on the back of my neck. Not fear exactly, but that thing where your body knows something's off before your brain does. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the sky for anything else. Everything looked normal again. When I turned back toward the barn, the yard light above the garage flicked off for about 2 seconds, then came back on. It's one of those dusk-to-dawn LEDs. I asked Travis about it the next morning, and he said it never does that. We even checked the photocell sensor. Nothing wrong. That day, Sunday, I packed up to head back home to Bismarck. It's about a 3-hour drive if you stick to the main highways, but I decided to take a longer route that cuts through the Theodore Roosevelt National Park area. Scenic route, you know? Somewhere between Fairfield and Grassy Butte, there's this pull-off with a view of the Little Missouri. I stopped to stretch my legs and eat the sandwich Travis's wife had packed me. I sat on the hood of my car and looked out over the hills, just dirt, scrub brush, and that long, winding river. That's when I noticed the silence again. No wind, no birds, not even the occasional bug, just this blanket of nothing. I looked up, almost expecting to see another light. Nothing. Then I noticed my phone screen had gone dark. Not off, just the screen black, even though it had been playing music. I pressed the power button and it came back on like normal, but the music app had closed itself out. As soon as I locked the phone and set it back down, the wind picked up again. A little gust, enough to shake the sagebrush and make my car creak a bit. Everything went back to normal. It was subtle. If the last 2 nights hadn't happened, I might not have even noticed. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. Didn't listen to anything. Just watched the road and kept checking the rearview mirror like something was going to follow me. That was 4 months ago. I haven't seen anything else since, but I don't stargaze like I used to. Not because I'm scared exactly, I just feel watched now sometimes. Like when I'm out walking the dog at night and I stop to tie my shoe, I get this sense that if I look up, I might see something just hanging there, waiting. And I don't know what I'd do if I did. I noticed the stars looked wrong before anything else happened. I was camping alone near the Coconino Rim, about 40 minutes outside Williams. It wasn't a serious backpacking trip or anything, just a quick overnight because work had been draining and I wanted a quiet night. I found a flat clearing off an old service road, pitched my tent, made some instant noodles, and sat back to watch the sky. It was one of those clear, dry nights where you could see every constellation like someone had wiped the sky clean. I was lying on my back on the foam pad outside the tent when I realized the stars directly above me seemed softer than the rest. Not dimmer, just slightly blurred, like I needed glasses. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, even sat up, but the patch stayed fuzzy. It covered maybe a dinner plate's worth of sky if you held it at arm's length. Everything else looked sharp. I figured maybe some heat from my little camp stove was distorting the air, but the stove had been off for almost an hour. The air was still. No wind, no bugs buzzing near my ears, just dead, open quiet. I lay back down to stare at it. The blur didn't pulse or shimmer. It just existed, like a thin lens floating above me. I stared long enough that I started picking out individual stars inside the patch, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. The stars inside the blur seemed to shift ever so slightly. Not twinkle, shift, like their positions were being nudged around. I sat up again, feeling stupid for getting nervous over something I couldn't even name. I told myself it was atmospheric ice crystals, or some balloon drifting high enough to warp the light. But the more I watched, the more I realized the patch was moving. Slowly, but moving. It drifted about the length of my thumb held up to the sky, sliding westward. The rest of the sky held still, crisp and normal. Only that patch smeared like the stars were behind warped glass. I listened for a plane. Nothing. I listened for wind. Nothing. I checked my phone for the time, 10:47, and when I looked back up, the blurred patch had shifted farther, picking up speed so slowly I didn't notice until I compared its position to a line of bright stars along the horizon. Then something flashed inside the blur. Not bright enough to blind me, just a faint pulse, like distant lightning behind clouds. Except there weren't any clouds. Another pulse came a few seconds later, soft, bluish, dull around the edges. Not lighting up the ground, just faintly illuminating whatever was causing the distortion. I stood up, a little shaky, and walked a few steps toward the tree line. The pine needles under my boots barely made a sound, which felt strange on its own. Normally they crackle. That night they were like damp carpet. The blur drifted more quickly now, sliding across the sky with a steadiness that didn't fit anything I knew. Not a satellite, not a plane, not even a slow-moving cloud bank. It felt intentional, controlled, but too quiet and too slow for anything mechanical. When it passed a particularly bright star, the star elongated into a streak for a split second before snapping back into place once the blur moved on. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. I stepped backward, bumping into my tent. That small sound, the tent poles rattling, felt jarring against the rest of the quiet. I backed inside and sat down, trying to keep the flap open so I could still see the sky. I didn't want to lose sight of whatever was happening, even though part of me didn't want to see any more. The blur moved toward the western ridge. Just as it reached the top of the tree line, a faint buzzing started. Not loud, not like an insect, more like the hum of a power line half a mile away. It vibrated in my chest more than in my ears. I held my breath without meaning to. The hum changed pitch, higher, then lower, then settling into something steady. Then it stopped, completely. The blur froze too, hovering in place above the ridge. I crawled halfway out of the tent, trying to keep some fabric between me and the open air for reasons I didn't fully understand. My head stuck out just enough to watch the sky. The blur stayed still for a long stretch of time. At least a minute, maybe more. It felt longer. I looked around at the clearing. The shadows from my small lantern were weirdly sharp, like the light wasn't diffusing normally. My tent's shadow stretched farther than it should have, thin and crisp. I turned the lantern off just to see if it made a difference. The clearing went dark, but the tent shadow stayed faintly visible, even without a light source. That's when I got goosebumps. I turned the lantern back on immediately, just to break the feeling. In the sky, the blur finally moved again. Not the drifting motion from before. This time it slid sideways in a perfectly straight line. Too smooth, too exact. It shifted like a cursor on a screen, then paused again. Another soft flash glimmered inside it, this one slightly brighter. Still no beam, no shape, just the faintest glow contained within the distortion. The hum started again. This time it came with a faint fluctuation in the air pressure, like when you drive through a tunnel with the window cracked. My ears popped. I ducked back into the tent completely, pulled the zipper halfway, then stopped myself. Zipping it all the way felt worse somehow, like I needed to be able to see out. The hum rose, then stopped for the second time. I waited for whatever would follow. Nothing happened for almost 30 seconds. Then the blur began to stretch. It elongated into an oval, thinning along one edge like it was being pulled. The stars inside the stretched area warped like reflections in rippling water. The blur grew longer and longer until it didn't look like a patch anymore. It looked like a line, a faint smear cutting across the night. Then it snapped back into its original shape. Just snapped. Instant. I gasped quietly. That sudden motion made my heart lurch. I backed away from the tent flap without closing it, pressing myself against the far wall of the nylon like it offered real protection. The blur began drifting again, this time faster, heading west, away from my campsite. As it moved, the stars behind it regained their sharpness, like the sky was returning to normal piece by piece. The hum faded with it, thinning until it was barely noticeable, then gone. I crawled forward again, watching the blur shrink as the distance grew. It didn't fade exactly. It just got smaller, like it was moving impossibly far away very quickly. At a certain point, I couldn't tell if it was still the blur or just a patch of cloud. Then it condensed into a small point of soft light. The point blinked once, then disappeared. Just like that. The sky was perfectly clear afterward. Every star sharp, every constellation where it should be. The air moved again, too. I felt a breeze lift the edge of my tent flap and brush my cheek. It was such a normal sensation that it felt surreal. I stepped outside, slowly, scanning the treetops and ridgeline. Nothing unusual. The buzzing was gone. The weird shadows from the lantern looked normal again. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, turning in slow circles like an idiot, trying to catch any lingering trace of what I'd seen. There was nothing. Eventually, I sat back on the foam pad, exactly where I'd been when the night started feeling strange. The stars looked completely ordinary. I didn't sleep well. Every rustle in the trees made me sit up. Every shift of wind made me check the sky, but the blur didn't return. In the morning, the campsite looked untouched, but something felt different. Not physically, just a heaviness in the air, like the night had left a residue my mind couldn't shake. I packed up camp earlier than planned. On the drive back toward town, I stopped at a turnout and stepped out to look at the sky again. Bright blue. Normal. But as I stood there, a weird feeling settled in me, like the clarity of the sky was too perfect, like something had smoothed it over. That feeling hasn't gone away completely, and sometimes when I'm outside late and the sky is really still, I catch myself staring up for a long time, waiting to see that slight blur sliding across the stars again. I live in a third-floor apartment in a complex in Portland. Nothing fancy, just one of those U-shaped buildings with the balconies facing a shared courtyard. Trees, some patio lights, picnic tables no one uses. It's not a bad place. Pretty quiet at night, except when someone's dog goes nuts or someone's kid sets off a firecracker. This happened a few months ago, late spring. I don't remember the exact date, but it was a weeknight because I'd been working late from home and shut my laptop down around 11:45. My apartment was hot, not unbearable, just stuffy, and I stepped out onto my balcony to cool off. I do that sometimes, just stand out there for a few minutes to breathe and look around. It was around midnight. No wind, sky mostly clear. I could see a few stars above the buildings, and the street beyond the complex was quiet. No cars, no people. The only noise was a fan humming in someone's window down the block and maybe a siren in the distance. I remember leaning on the railing and checking my phone. Then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, above the opposite side of the courtyard, near the rooftop line of the building across from me. It was a soft, oval-shaped light, hovering. Not close, but not far either, maybe 30 feet above the roof and kind of centered between two buildings like it had picked a spot. It wasn't bright. It didn't cast shadows or reflect off the windows, just a pale white glow, like a frosted bulb behind tinted glass. At first I thought it was a drone. People fly them around here sometimes. But it wasn't buzzing, it wasn't moving, it didn't wobble or blink. It just hung there, perfectly still. I squinted at it, waiting for some sign of movement. A red light, a tilt, anything. Nothing. Just the soft light holding in the air like it was pinned there. I stepped back inside, grabbed my phone, and tried to get a picture. I aimed through the railing gap, focused the camera, but the screen couldn't lock on. It kept blurring like it was struggling to find the contrast. I took a photo anyway, and it just came out dark. No light, no shape, just the vague silhouette of the rooftops. While I was fiddling with it, I heard the neighbor's sliding door open on the unit to my left. It was Mike. He lives alone, maybe late 50s, quiet guy. Usually nods, but doesn't say much. He stepped out in a t-shirt and shorts, looked up almost immediately, and froze. We both stood there in silence, watching it. After maybe 10 seconds, he muttered, "Nope," under his breath. Not scared, not dramatic, just matter of fact. Then he turned around, slid the door shut, and disappeared back inside. That's when the weird part started. The light hadn't moved once. Not even a little. But the sound around me started fading. Slowly. I didn't notice it all at once, but things got quieter. The fan down the block stopped, the refrigerator hum from inside my apartment seemed to vanish. Even my breath felt muted. It was like being in one of those sound booths, where everything's padded and wrong. The air felt heavy, like pressure was building around my ears. I took a step back into my doorway just to test it. Inside, everything was fine. Sound normal. Step back out, muffled. Same air, same space, just off. Like the light was affecting the space it was hovering over. I watched it for what felt like 5 minutes. Could have been less, could have been more. Time felt stretchy. The light didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It just was. Then, just as slowly as everything had gone quiet, the sound came back. Fan hum returned. Distant sirens again. My fridge kicked on. The usual city noise. And the light just faded. Not blinked out, faded. Like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch until it was gone. There was no trail, no movement upward or sideways. 1 second it was hovering, the next it was gone. And the sky behind it was clear, nothing blocking stars. I stayed out there another few minutes. Mike never came back out. I didn't try to knock on his door or say anything the next day. Honestly, I didn't know what I'd even ask him. Hey, remember the floating light? Just didn't feel like something people wanted to talk about. Later, I checked my phone again. The photo was still there, just a black square. No stars, no rooftops. The image before it, one I'd taken earlier of a grocery receipt to text to someone, showed up fine. So did the one after. Just that one frame, nothing but darkness. I didn't see it again after that. But I still check the sky when I step out, especially late. Especially when it's quiet. I was living in East Haddam at the time, renting a guest room above a garage from a retired couple who were barely ever home. I worked part-time at a call center in Middletown, and the only way to get there was the 5:40 a.m. bus into town. It ran once an hour, and if you missed it, you were pretty much out of luck until 6:45. It was early February, and that morning was one of those weirdly mild ones. You could smell the thaw coming, even though the grass was still dead and the sky was the kind of gray that never really brightens. No frost on the ground, no wind, just a sort of quiet that felt more like late fall than winter. I left the garage apartment around 5:15 with a thermos of coffee and my earbuds in, like usual. The bus stop was about a 10-minute walk, just a wooden bench on a patch of dirt near the edge of some trees across from an empty lot. No shelter or anything, just the bench, a faded sign, and a trash can that always smelled faintly of cigarettes and rotting fast food. There were no other people out, no cars. That stretch of road stayed pretty dead until after sunrise. I sat down on the bench, checked my phone, 5:27, and settled in. A couple of robins were kicking around in the brush behind the bench. I remember that because it struck me as weird they were already up, even before sunrise. I was mid-scroll, halfway through some article I don't remember now, when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. At first I thought it was just a plane or maybe someone's security floodlight flicking on through the trees, but it was too far back for that. The trees behind the bench sloped down into a small valley, then back up toward a ridge maybe half a mile away. Whatever the light was, it looked like it was coming from beyond that ridge, but too low for a plane and too high and isolated for a house light. I took out my earbuds. The light didn't flicker. It didn't move at first. It just hovered, low and dull, like a dirty bulb behind fogged glass. The color wasn't easy to pin down, somewhere between yellow and white, but not quite either. I kept staring at it, trying to place it. Then it started to rise, not fast, almost like it didn't weigh anything, just a slow lift, straight up above the treetops. It stopped maybe 30 feet above the ridge and just hung there. That's when I noticed the sound, or I guess the lack of it. The birds had gone silent. I didn't hear any wind, which was normal for that time of day, but the silence had weight to it, like my ears were plugged. I rubbed them like maybe they were still adjusting from sleep, but it didn't help. The light pulsed once, faintly. Not a beam or anything, just a soft swell, like a slow heartbeat. And I felt weird, dizzy all of a sudden. My coffee thermos slipped out of my hand and rolled off the bench into the dead leaves. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to stay upright. The ground swayed under me like I was standing on a boat. I thought maybe it was a blood sugar thing. I hadn't eaten anything yet, but I wasn't shaking. I wasn't nauseous. I was just pulled down. Heavy. I looked at my phone again. The time said 5:33. I remember that number clearly. I remember thinking, okay, 7 minutes to go. Just hold on. I put my phone in my lap and looked back up. The light was gone. No trace of it. Nothing above the ridge. The sky still looked the same. Gray, pre-dawn, maybe starting to brighten just a little. I scanned the trees, still quiet. No birds. The dizziness passed like someone had flipped a switch, just gone, all at once. I sat back, blinked a few times, then reached down for my thermos. It had rolled into a patch of mud. I wiped it on my pants and took a sip, still warm. I figured I must have just gotten lightheaded. Lack of sleep, maybe. Didn't feel like enough of a reason, but that's all I had. I checked my phone again. It said 6:29. The bus was already pulling away down the road. I stood up so fast I almost dropped the thermos again. I looked both ways like maybe there was another one coming behind it, but no. Just the back end of the 540, or I guess, by then, the 630, disappearing down the curve. I stared at the screen. It didn't make sense. It had just been 5:33. I hadn't moved. I hadn't passed out. I remembered everything. The light, the dizziness, sitting on the bench, checking the time, looking up again. There was no gap, no blank space in my memory. But the time was gone. I walked a few steps up the road trying to get my bearings. The street looked the same. No cars, no one walking their dog. Just that creeping brightness of an early morning that feels off somehow. I opened my phone to the lock screen again. 6:31. Battery at 92%, which was about what I'd expect. No new texts or missed calls. No alarms. I went into the settings and checked the screen time usage. It showed 5:28 to 6:30 as inactive. Nothing opened. No activity at all. I sat back down, just for a minute. I wasn't tired, but my legs didn't feel solid. A minute later, I heard the robins again. Their chirping came back all at once, like someone had unmuted the woods. A couple fluttered out of the brush behind the bench and landed near the trash can. That's when it hit me just how quiet it had been before. Like not just no birds, but no sound. Nothing at all. I waited another 5 minutes, then started walking back toward the apartment. I didn't bother checking my phone again. I knew what it would say. I called in sick that day. Told them I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't really a lie. I kept looking out the windows, half expecting that dull light to show up again. It didn't. The sky cleared around 10 a.m. and turned into a bright, sunny day. That evening, I walked back to the stop just to see it again in daylight. The bench looked normal. Leaves on the ground, a couple cigarette butts, one crushed energy drink can. I stepped around to the back and looked through the trees toward the ridge. It was just woods. Bare branches, some tangled underbrush, and beyond that, the rise where the light had come from. There was nothing there. No trails, no clearings, no houses that I could see, just more trees. I stood there for a while, listening. I could hear birds, the occasional car, a dog barking faintly somewhere down the road. I walked home, made dinner, watched some stupid show, tried to go to bed early. I didn't sleep much. For a few weeks after, I took the later bus, the 6:45. I told myself it was to get more sleep, but really I just didn't want to be at that stop in the dark again. Not alone. Not before dawn. Eventually, I started driving to work instead. I never really explained why. I just said the bus schedule wasn't working for me. I haven't missed time again. Not like that. But sometimes when I'm walking early in the morning, like if I'm out taking the trash down or going to my car, I'll get a weird feeling. Like a soft pressure in the air. Not loud, not painful, just there. I always glance toward the trees. I never see anything, but I always look.